us a brief on what's happening. Earlier on, Alex, we saw there was the cat. And to me, it kind of feels there was a small cat that we've seen has been picked up. You'll give us details on that. It may be symbolizing what Kenyans would like to see a cat at the Treasury. Alex, what's going on so far?
Yes, Dan. Of course, Kenyans expect that the budget will have some cuts for them. Budget cuts are expected by many Kenyans. But right here at the National Treasury, something very interesting has happened. Behind me, over my shoulder, on my right side, is a battery of cameramen who are waiting for the National Treasury CS Henry Rotich to come out and hold the briefcase and take the traditional photo just before he walks over to Parliament, which is just hundreds of meters away. But then there is some good news for the budget cut. This is the budget cut that we covered about an hour ago. Officials from the Kenya Society of Protection and Care of Animals are here, KSPCA. They have arrived here a few minutes ago in order to treat the cat and to pick it. And right now I'm joined by Paul Mufunyi, who is a project officer at the KSPCA, who will tell us what status he found of the cat when he came here. Paul, what can you comment about this kitten?
My comment is this kitten was very hungry, that's number one. And as you can see, it was a bit dull because maybe for 1 or 2 days, the cat has not eaten anything. So that's why you see the kitten could not even go away, just stranded in the middle of the town. Yeah.
Given that today we are talking about budgets, is KSPCA given a budget by the national government, or where do you get your funding?
I wish they could, but unfortunately no. KSPCA, we depend on well-wishers who would come in, give us 2,000, 1,000, 5,000. So yeah, Kenyans are the ones who are helping us, but not government.
And how often do you get maybe calls regarding animals in distress and people calling you to assist them to come and pick them?
We are always on the road rescuing animals, almost every day, because this is the only organization that rescue animals in distress or mistreated and such. So we receive so many calls almost every day. I mean, every day. Right now we are 3 of us, field officers. All of them are out there rescuing animals, me being one of them. So we really we have a big place to cover and many animals to rescue, but unfortunately we are just struggling with funds.
What would you comment about the experience of working at KSPCA and how much it has changed you and your outlook towards life?
It has really changed my life because I have come to learn, and also I always like to educate public that these animals, we need them, they need us, but we are the ones to take care of them. And without these animals, I don't think we as human will survive very well on this planet. Otherwise, we need these animals, and also to treat them very well, to respect them, and also to help them so that we can live in this planet all together. Yeah.
And lastly, maybe this cat, now that we can give the name budget cat, what do you think will be its fate, and do you think that it is going to make it?
Yeah, I think this cat will make it. Only that we'll have to take it to KSPCA, feed it properly and give it a good food, and also vaccinate the cat and hope that people will come and adopt. So that's why urging the public to come to KSPCA if you want to adopt a cat or a dog. We have nice rescued animals that are looking for homes. They are very, very nice, well treated, vaccinated, fully vaccinated, and also neutered. So that you have a cat, you don't need to end up with 20 cats. It's good to neuter your cat or your dog. Make sure that you have a manageable number, the animals that you can treat well and also feed them properly. Give them love too. Yeah.
Thank you very much. That was Paul Mufunyi from the KSPCA. He's a field officer, and now they just want to take the cat back to their offices and back to the rescue place where they will take care of them. It's glad to report that the budget cut is now taken care of and it's in safe hands. And I now take you back to studio as we hand over to Hudhaifa Aden, who is in Parliament.
Thank you very much, Alex. And we see the cat was hungry at Treasury. It may be saying something about Kenya as well, where we really want to see budget cuts, and the people who want the cat are hungry. But we shall be able to see what the Treasury CS has in store for us, and he's meant to be heading to Parliament. And so let's precede him just a bit and cross over to Parliament, where Hudhaifa Aden is, to just give us a brief and possibly give us an idea of who has arrived so far in regards to the parliamentarians, I beg your pardon. Hudhaifa, what's the latest on that end?
Good afternoon, Dan. Of course, a lot is happening here. Of course, there are a number of committees that are in session. I've seen earlier Mwangi Kiunjuri, who's the Agriculture Cabinet Secretary, attending to the Agriculture Committee, but also recently the CS of Lands, Farida Karone, actually reported here. I don't know if she's actually going before a committee, but what I know for a fact is that maybe she would be wanting to be with her colleague, the Cabinet Secretary for National Treasury, Henry Rotich. A number of MPs are actually coming in right now to attend the main session in the afternoon. The Parliament leadership, of course, from both houses, both Senate and the National Assembly, are here. I saw the minority whip. I saw the majority whip at the National Assembly. I saw the Speaker of the Senate, Kenneth Lusaka, come in a short while ago. So, of course, there is a lot of activities happening here. Members of the Diplomatic Corps coming in also to maybe follow up what is happening and how allocation is happening. Of course, as Henry Rotich tables a 3 trillion shilling budget, which is the biggest budget in the region this afternoon. But what a lot of us really, as business reporters, as business journalists, are really keen on is how the government intends to generate revenue, maybe to finance development budget, because you remember that a lot of money is going, actually more than close to 800 billion shillings is going to repayment of debt, which has hit 5 trillion, public debt hitting 5 trillion shillings. Of course, and there is the issue about recurrent expenditure, there is the issue about wage bill, but much more than anything else, I want to see how Henry Rotich would be able to maybe tax different sectors of the economy and maybe raise the 3 trillion shillings that they are looking at. But a lot of activities here in Parliament. We'd be following closely what is happening here. We'd be speaking to the different MPs. We'd be speaking to different stakeholders. Mwangi Kiunjuri, who's the Cabinet Secretary for Agriculture, actually is standing. I don't know if my camera person will be able to find him, but maybe if he comes out, we should be able to speak to him if he would allow us, or if he would give us that opportunity to speak to him. But I don't know, he's held up. He's speaking to different members of Parliament, but we'll be speaking to them later in, of course, this segment. Back to you, Dan, in studio.
Thank you very much, Uday Faiden, for appraising us on what's happening at Parliament, where we're expecting the CS to be going in about an hour or so, hopefully, and begin his speech to Parliament and to the country at large. But to look at some of the issues that are in this budget and regarding the economy, because that's what ultimately it falls on, I'm joined in studio by Ashif Kassam, the Executive Chairman of RSM, who was with us before. And before actually we get into our panel discussion, let's just cross over first of all back to Parliament and see what the CS for Agriculture was going to say to UDAIFA.
Dan, of course, as I had earlier indicated there is Mwangi Kiunjuri, who's the Cabinet Secretary for Agriculture, who was attending actually to a parliamentary committee this morning before the main session, which is, of course, the budget. But as you can remember, the budget, of course, and the Big Four agenda of President Uhuru Kenyatta really includes food security, which is a key docket under the Agriculture Ministry. And there was also the recent scandal around NCPB. Maybe if the CS would be able to tell us what he discussed with the parliamentary committee.
Today's session was not discussing about the maize issues. We were discussing the issue concerning macadamia, the farming of macadamia, and also the Directorate of AFA. And the issue was centered on how we can be able to support our farmer to get a better price for macadamia, a price that is competitive and meeting the international standards. As you realize, we have been having issues in the macadamia industry, whereby the producers and processors are not in agreement, where the producers are asking for more in terms of payment, and also the issue of low macadamia being imported, and on whether we can be able to lift the ban on the issue of importation of low macadamia nuts.
Shall we speak briefly about maybe the maize importation and the issue generally about fertilizers that has been ongoing? Maybe if that is not the main session that you discussed with the parliamentary committee.
We had a discussion, a sitting in Parliament on the issue of maize, and it was centered on the buying of maize and the issue of farmer not benefiting from the intention of the government subsidy, whereby traders came in and they were the ones involved in selling of maize, not the farmer. We agreed that we should be able to do an audit on whether really money was used the right way, whether we lost money in the whole process. The committee had demanded that we give an explanation in 21 days and table the audit report. which will be ending next week on Wednesday. And therefore, we shall be able to table the audit report on Tuesday.
Shall we then briefly touch about food security then, of course, which is a big four agenda of President Uhuru Kenyatta, and the budget, which is, of course, really hinged on the big four agenda of President Uhuru Kenyatta?
As a ministry, we also decided, because the agenda is already set, it's a big four, and one of the big four is 100% food and nutrition security in this country. And we have also adjusted accordingly, adjusted our budgets, and also requested the county governments also to adjust accordingly. We have also been able to come up with the issues that can make us have quick gains in the next 4 years. Now that the agenda was for 5 years, now we are left with 4 years and 2 months. We have looked at every department in agriculture, like for example in fisheries, and we are coming up with programs that will ensure that the fish market is well now elaborated, that our farmers can be able to market their fish internationally, that we can be able to bring the cost of fishing and landing of fishing in the country in a cheaper way than China. We are also introducing the water pods systems again that were introduced during this economic stimulus, so that at least they can be able to benefit our farmers. On the issue of irrigation, again, we are doing the water pan family, and also ensuring that we are going to desuit the existing colonial dams across the country, targeting 4,200 of those dams in the next 3 years. We have an issue of crops, where for the first time we are coming up with the farmer registration. That is a data, a one-stop shop, whereby by a push of a button, you can understand agriculture in Kenya is already ongoing. And lastly is an issue of livestock. Again, we have been faced by issues of dry spells, whereby we lose a lot of our animals. We are coming up with feed routes that will be advertised from next week, so that we can be able for the first time to capture all the animals that would have died without intervention of government. Those are some of the measures that we are putting in place, aligning them to the Big Four.
Maybe before I can let you go, the last one really briefly, when do you expect that we'd be 100% food secure as a country?
You cannot give tentative. There are so many factors that are put into place, but we are geared, we shall put all efforts to ensure that in the next 5 years we can be food secure. We shall try.
We shall try. Thank you so much. That is Mwangi Kiunjuri, who is the Agriculture Cabinet Secretary, who was attending before a Parliamentary Committee on Agriculture, talking about a number of things. Of course, we will remain here and be able to bring you what is happening here as Henry Rotich finds his way here to attend, of course, to make his budget statement later in the afternoon. Back to you, Dan.
Thank you very much, Hudhaifa Eden, for that interview with the CS for Agriculture, Mwangi Kiunjuri, who has had some different pointers to bring out in regards to why he was at the Agriculture Committee, or rather before it, and as well as looking at the matters of the budget and food security, food and nutrition security. So I come back to my introduction of my guests. Once again, I was saying we've got Ashif Kassam, the Executive Chairman of RSM, who's been with us. Thank you for being with us. We have Muthoni Wangai, an FCPA representing ISPAC. Thank you for being here. We have Elvis Ogeto, a partner at RSM, who's been with us, as well as Dennis Kabara, economist and public finance expert. Thank you for joining us all. Now, I'll begin with you, Dennis. Before we get into your overall view of, of the budget as it is, this 3 trillion shilling budget, we've had the CS talking about, he's been asked about, when we look to be food secure, but it doesn't look like he says he's not committal basically to it. Is this a conflict based on the fact that he's been given some sort of target by his boss?
I think, the big, as far as I understand it, the Big Four is about 100% food security by 2022. That's what we understand it. So I think that there's I won't say a conflict. I think there's a struggle to make it real. Let me put it that way.
Okay. But what is your overall view about this 3 trillion shilling budget, the largest we've ever seen in Kenya? And inevitably, every year it keeps going up. What is your general feeling about it?
I don't know. I don't know what we're buying. I think that's the first question. I was actually doing some rough calculations. We're basically spending 9 billion shillings a day. That's what 3 trillion means. We're spending 9 billion shillings a day. We're collecting 6 billion shillings a day. So daily we have a deficit of 3 billion. Then we have debt service of another 3 billion a day. So what I'm really interested in is how this is going to balance out. For me, the budget is about two things. You must be able to explain the words in numbers, and the numbers must be able to explain in words.
I like your mathematics there. I'm actually not noting it down. Muthoni, what is your view on the budget as it is?
I think my view on any budget would be what we are going to do with the money. If you know, when you take your first mortgage, it's normally very difficult to explain how you're going to pay it back. And it's very, very unrelated often with your current income. So if you can tell us, the budget is an investment. So what is the return on that investment? And we have certain things which are, of course, very astounding. As for example, the wage bill, how much money we spend on the wages for public sector. But again, we should be asking ourselves, what do we get out of this wage? Noting particularly that it's very difficult politically to start talking about, say, downsizing. And sometimes, many times, even in industry, downsizing doesn't give you the right answer. The question is, are we demanding the kind of return we want? Are we making sure people are accounting for the time they are paid for and the services and what quality? And then from there, we can be able to generate the revenue and the returns that we deserve from that 3 billion, whether it's in debt payment and so on. You can see a big proportion of the debt is to service infrastructure, and infrastructure is long-term. And it is very difficult to finance infrastructure without going into some form of debt. And if you can get the infrastructure to make some fundamental changes on the economy so that you generate overall, because it's a question of scale. You can, for example, say if the port in Mombasa is restricted in terms of import and export, it doesn't matter what else you do in the country if you cannot service that. So you need the investment in order to do that. So if we have a clear view of the return we are going to get in that, then it would be fine. But one of the things, of course, will come in is the way, whether we are accounting for that money, whether we are using it the right way, and obviously it draws us back into the issues of corruption, which I don't want to talk about, because I'm sure sometime in this program somebody will talk about it.
Inevitably.
Yes, inevitably. Yeah, thank you.
Right. Elvis, we've hit the 5 trillion shilling debt mark. Is this a cause for concern, or are we still in a safe zone? Because Treasury has constantly said that as much as we have a large debt burden, we are still in a safe zone, and so the government is not worried about it. But is that the actual situation, in your view?
I believe, as my colleague mentioned, the issue is what you do with the money. The concern again is, how are we balancing it out? Are we borrowing to finance long-term, short-term to finance long-term projects? Is there a mismatch between what we are repaying, and is that hurting what we're able to do on a day-to-day basis? So I wouldn't necessarily look at the proportion, even if it's about 50% or close to 50, 60% of your GDP, but what are you doing with the money that you're getting? And is there any form of accountability? Are we seeing results with what we're doing with the money?
Okay, Ashif, we've seen again, like we saw earlier in the sound bites from the different Wananchi who are saying, cost of living is too high. We've seen it constantly being said that. Is it just is it a justified call, or is it one that they will just have to deal with, or is it one that people are just used to complaining? There's someone who's arguing maybe people are just used to complaining that even when things are not that bad, they still say they're bad.
Okay, from the soundbite, there's one good thing I picked up today: KSPCA. My children are looking at supporting some institutions, so I'll probably get them to make it a commercial project to start supporting them.
See, we've saved a cut and we've got financing for KSPCA.
So we'll try and do something around there. The second thing which puzzles me is, yesterday night when I went to sleep, I had a figure of the budget expenditure being 2.5 trillion. Now it's 3 trillion. So in 12 hours, I can see it going by 500 million, which even compounds what Dennis gave us in terms of figures, which is... But, coming to the Wananchi, I think the reality is that we can't reduce the cost of goods unless we bring about better efficiency in the management of this country, and we break the cartels that are there. I think there are serious cartels in the distribution network, in the agriculture supply chain, and I think we need to look at this country in a totally different way. That's the only way we'll satisfy the 190. But if you look at the budget that the minister coming out and saying we are going to reduce the cost, how is he going to reduce the cost? He can't dictate what the private sector is selling items at. He can't stop charging VAT or reduce the cost of VAT because he needs that money to finance the budget. And, like Mudhoni said yesterday, Winnie was saying yesterday when we were together, is that everything is taxed. When you get your salary, it is taxed. When it's transferred to your bank account, there is an excise duty. When you go to the ATM and withdraw the money, there is excise duty. When you then take that money to buy some goods, there is VAT and excise duty. Okay? And we are in this parallel of all these taxes coming together. And to me, there is no way we are going to make the 190 happy unless we sort out the root problem. And the root problem is people are not getting the service. There is nobody to hear them when they have a problem. We use 36% of our money in central government expenditure, including security and judiciary. Okay, if we take a vote, how many people are happy with the security that they have? How many people are happy with the judiciary that we have? And I think unless we go into a white paper and redo the whole thing and look at what is the needs of this country, what is the needs of the people, and go backwards, and it might be a painful journey for some, but that's the only way we can move to a new level of how we run this country.
Dennis, just now going back to agriculture and the fact that the Maputo Declaration expects there to be an allocation of at least 10% going to agriculture. We are at less than 3%. Based on the kind of dynamics we have as an economy, are we looking at getting to 10% anytime soon, or is it one of those things that we just have to leave on paper, but in reality it's not there?
My view about, I think these declarations are useful, like the 10% and so on, but I think we need to shift our thinking to how much can be done by private sector. And what can government do to promote private sector investment in agriculture? I think that's really what we should be doing. Because I doubt it. If we talk about 10% for agriculture, 15% for health, that's already 25% of the budget. You haven't talked about education, which is already 20%, so that's 45%. You haven't talked about infrastructure. You see, so some of those commitments, I think we need to start thinking about them in the context of things like public-private partnerships. That's the way I would look at it.
Which the government has been getting into, especially in something else, which is also in the Big Four agenda, which is the housing. Because, Elvis, we are seeing that there's been a reluctance of sorts by developers to get into low-income house development because they feel there's no money there really. So the government has, said it will cover some of the costs. That's what at least the CS said. They're going to cover some of the costs, be it about the land and the infrastructure, so that the developer will only focus on the actual structures. Do you think this is actually going to work, and we'll actually see more quality and decent low-income housing being put up?
I think if there's partnership between government and the private sector, and anyone going into any venture is obviously out to make money. So the issue is what will be the cost of construction? Is the government creating an environment where that cost can come down in terms of, say, tax interventions? And then, of course, the uptake. Uptake is dependent on purchasing power. So if you're talking about low-income housing, who are you targeting? And do they have the ability to actually get into mortgages? So as we develop this, we also need to think about the financing. And I see government is also looking at that in terms of creating mortgage instruments to ensure that the low-income earners or people targeted to take up these units are able to afford the housing. So bottom line for anyone developing this is, are they making money out of it? So if we deal with the cost and you deal with the uptake in terms of people who will actually purchase the units, then it is a viable venture.
Okay, and do we foresee, do you believe first of all there's a bubble that's meant to be bursting in terms of, we've had a lot of conversation about the real estate sector and how there is, the bubble, people are fearing the bubble will burst. Do you foresee like there's a bubble that's going to burst, and if it's there, is there anything the government can do?
I think one is that in terms of bubbles bursting, a lot of it depends on the what we call information in the financial world. You can create a bubble and burst it using the information you have. So that is why it would be important, as far as the budgeting is concerned, because it's a time the country has a chance to focus on the financial policy, on the economic policy, to try and use the right messages so that you have the right sentiments. Sentiments have a very powerful effect on everything you do. For example, you had the other day the handshake. The handshake did a lot of things. It did not involve any money. So you need to develop the right sentiments so that all your economic objectives can be met without fearing the bubbles. For example, if you continue hammering that there's going to be a bubble, you'll develop the bubble. It will come because investors will be cautious. They don't want to get into it. The takers will be cautious. So you need to completely, together with the budget policy, you develop the sentiment part of the economy. And I think that's where we totally fail when it comes to developing the policy. That is, you deal with the social aspect of the budget, just besides the big figures and so on. That also takes me back to agriculture, because like agriculture, it's unfortunate because even if we pumped a lot of money into it, and we don't have the right adjustment, and especially because it touches the bottom of the pyramid in terms of production, if the wrong messages are going down, then you're not going to get the results. So together with this budget policy, you require the right communication, and it is structured communication. Because, for example, when you talk about the PPPs, that's a public, is it public and private partnerships? You need to have the right framework to get to be able to do that. And that is when people will understand that when government allocates 39 billion to this area, I come in this way, and I can partner this way. But if we leave it at very high policy level, then you don't get the results. But the issue of bubbles, I know bankers are normally very concerned, because if you keep saying the banks are going to fold up, then essentially you develop that bubble. I think for housing, for example, we have a long way to go, because we still have a big deficit. And for me, I normally get very concerned, because you can't have a city where we have all this high-end living, beautiful homes, some of them which feature, worldwide. I hear one of the ambassadors was saying that when she was sent to Kenya, she knew she was going to live in the second best house in their country, among the ambassadors in their country, in Kenya, here somewhere in Roslyn. I'm sorry, I hope I'm not promoting Roslyn. But next door, you have Githogoro, you have, there's another one which I can't remember. There is no way you can explain that as a society, as a community, that you are living here in this type of luxury, and then you have all these very, very places which don't even have sanitary conditions. They don't have sewers. It's not possible. So government has to come somewhere. But finally, because we are a very market-oriented country, it is to support the private sector. How we do that, the framework should come in, and that's what they should be designing.
Right, and when we talk about the PPPs, Ashif, in regards to the housing right now, the structure that the government has put out may possibly, become a disincentive for the smaller developers, because the bigger developers are more likely to get opportunities, because it says that it could drive small players out of the market, since deep-pocketed firms would enjoy faster approval of plans. Is this now meaning that if I'm a small investor, I don't develop as huge projects as some people, I should just move away from the low-income housing, or not enjoy the opportunity presented by the government?
To me, I don't see that problem. I actually see that the people who are going to benefit from this are creative developers. And I was just talking to one of my construction clients, and I said, unless we change the way we construct, units in Kenya, we are never going to be able to compete in the medium or the low end space. It takes us between 18 to 24 months to build a unit. Okay, if you're talking about low housing, then there's a lot of prefab, there's a lot of precast, okay, which needs to reduce the overall cost. And I think the people who will benefit from this is people who got technology that are going to come in, and it's the first movers of technology or building technology that will take this thing to the next phase. But again, this comes with the whole issue of what Muthoni said, is how are we, promoting what we are saying. Okay, we have this. We just saw a statement that we are going to be sufficient in food and agriculture and nutrition by 2022. Yet one of the key ministers says he's not sure. Now, to me, if you're not all singing from the same plate, and if you all don't have a same plan, whatever we write in the budget policy statement doesn't matter. But overall, everybody can benefit, and it's a first mover advantage of people who will embrace new technology for this.
Okay, and one of the things that comes up when you talk about buying houses and, you know, construction is because a lot of it is done on borrowing, and this brings to play the issue of interest rates. And there's been the issue of the interest rate caps, and, you know, the president had alluded to the fact that by, you know, through what is going to be presented today, we are going to be having some kind of revision, or there'll be a change. Dennis, what would be your proposed way forward in terms of the interest rate caps? Do we foresee it being scrapped altogether, as a proposed to be scrapped, or some kind of revision?
I think they're trying to do it. They're trying to do it in a roundabout way. If I think about this from one angle, government cannot afford to remove interest rate caps, because the cost of their borrowing will just go out of the window, and the debt we're talking about of 3 billion a day becomes 5 billion a day. Yeah, so I think there's a political side to it. You know, the interest rate cap cuts the cost of borrowing for government. So I think they're still looking at other instruments. I saw that there was this financial conduct institution and so on. I think they're still looking at other instruments to do this, but I'm not sure we're going to have an answer today.
And what options are there if we're not to scrap it? What options would there be in terms of giving different options and still have you know, an interest rate that works for as many players as possible?
Remember, I think some of the ideas that have come out, I think one of the big ones is about credit reference bureaus. It's about credit information. Having transparency of charges, making sure banks are transparent in their charging. So there's a whole kind of market. You need to create a market incentive. Again, back to what Muthoni is saying. Create a sentiment that promotes responsible borrowing at affordable rates. I think that's really what it is.
Okay. Yes, you could pick up on that.
I was just thinking that that one of the things we could look at is, for example, having some allocation by industry. Especially for the larger industries like agriculture, we demand that when you're lending, part of your portfolio must go to agriculture. It's very outrageous, because, but particularly agriculture, because I'm trying to sort out especially the poverty issue. Then the other thing is that I don't know what the banks use, but you can separate risks and allow higher interest rates for some of the riskier portfolios, but have a curve for the people within the minimum, the minimum and average, you know, what can I go, risk, average risk. Of course, it's a big, obviously we'd require a central bank and maybe someone to work out that. But for me, I think it is very unfortunate if we cannot allocate part of our credit to agriculture, just because maybe they can't meet certain requirements, especially on interest rates, because it basically affects the bottom line, and poverty gets stuck there. The issue of cost of living gets there, and it is an important thing, because again, like my colleague says here, Kabara, you cannot just lose an interest rates, because we go back to the usual very high interest rates. In fact, we start having losses again, you know, debt losses and so on. So it's important to think about that separation. You say agriculture, we want allocation of at least 10%. Okay, then you are left with 90% to do whatever you like. Then you are given a profile of risks. Here you can lend at this much. This you can lend at that much.
Okay, and I'll just follow that up with a question that we could have more than one response to. Maybe Dennis can tell us. The IMF had, you know, kind of told Kenya, not kind of had told Kenya, the government had been told they need to, you know, do away with the interest rates so that they can be able to allow them to have the line of funding, which had been, you know, frozen. What if Treasury does not meet that today? What would the repercussions be?
No, but you know, the wording was very careful. They said you must substantially modify interest rate controls. So that could mean anything. It could be about the interest rate caps. It could be about promoting a new credit market, new credit markets. You see, that's the other thing. if you only have one source of finance and that source of finance is going to crowd you in. It could be about promoting other sources of interest, other sources of credit. So I think the IMF was not saying remove the caps, but it was saying think about what the caps are doing for the economy. Let's use the wording substantially modify interest rate. And they said interest rate controls, not caps. So I think we need to look at that wording, and I think there's still a bit of flexibility for government.
Ashif.
You know, I first always say that it's not that the interest rate caps are not working. To me, the interest rate caps have done the right thing to balance the margin of banks at 5%, which is a global benchmark. The problem that I see is that the government borrowing, you know, at very ridiculous rates. If Kenya has got a B+ rating, why should it be borrowing on treasury bill or treasury bonds, on infrastructure bonds at 12%, 12.5%? If you gross it, it becomes 17%. Okay, so you're borrowing at higher rate than private sector can access credit. Our euro bond is priced at between 6 and 8%. Okay, again, normal companies get credit at 5.5%, 6%. AAA companies. The government can't get money lower than that. And why is the government paying an interest rate far in excess of the inflation rate? Okay, so to me, the biggest challenge is the restructuring of our debt to make it more stable, to make it more effective, and to make it more cost effective, I would say, and to re-look at what rates we are borrowing from the public, and have a standby facility that if people are not willing to lend us, we've got a standby facilities. Where will the banks put the money? Where will the insurance companies put the money? 45% or 50% of the bank's balance sheets are lying in treasury bills and bonds. That is why they are not lending to the private sector. Create an environment that will force the banks to lend to the private sector.
Elvis, what if the government, through the CS today or the Treasury, does not give much of an alternative when it comes to the private sector, which has been, especially the SMEs, which have been struggling when it comes to access to credit? What alternatives do they have if they, if nothing much is done to try and support their cause?
Okay. Unfortunately, that stifles what the line of credit that they would need to grow their business, and we are looking at growing the economy, not just at the top, but looking at SMEs growing and expanding. We've seen a proliferation of organizations that are now coming in to replace what the normal banks would do in terms of lending, and unfortunately that is very unstructured and increases the cost of lending. So it's important that if we cannot rein in and ensure that the banks are able to lend or otherwise support the SMEs, then we find ways to ensure that the SMEs space is able to thrive otherwise.
Okay, and some that's cut. Yes, Dennis, you got something to say.
I'm just thinking. You see, the other point about SMEs, one of the key issues is not. If you look at all the studies, they tell us a big part of SME borrowing is short-term, overdrafts, trade credit, right? It's never long-term. So what SMEs are really looking for is a long-term vehicle, and maybe we want to hear about this Biashara Kenya fund that is being created, the one that's merging all this, the women's fund, the youth fund, into some kind of banking institution. Maybe that's what we want to hear today. Because I think it's not the short. I think the short term is expensive, but SMEs also need medium to long term funding. That's, I think, the thing that they miss. That's where they have nothing, and they have to rely on savings and family and so on.
And see, because at times because of the size of the organization, you find I've got a small business, I've been selling pens, for instance, and it's yet to get to a point where I may need that long term kind of commitment. Does it mean that I don't have much of a choice at that point?
I think, okay, every business has to start somewhere and has to grow slowly somewhere. But I think what's happening is our banking system, and maybe the incentives for our banking system, are not aligning with the growth path of business. Right? They are biased towards big business, which is established, less risky, and so on. And for smaller business, it's biased towards short-term lending, which you can recover quickly. And I think we just need to have a kind of maturity profile of banking that goes with the maturity of business. I think that's the policy thinking that we need to be looking at.
Okay. Muthoni, corruption is one of the biggest issues we're dealing with right now, and we're hearing of so many scandals or alleged scandals which we've been broadcasting about. We've had it on the print and everywhere pretty much, on all platforms of media, and some which we are yet to unveil or unearth, so to speak. We've seen the president coming forward with a very strong arm in terms of trying to fight corruption and along the way, he somewhat bypassed the EACC. You know, he's decided, let's go with DCI and the DPP. Are we likely to see a reduction in the budget towards EACC, which would then be an addition, which would be added possibly to the security budget?
The issue of corruption is, what can I say? I don't want to say that it should be an emergency, because, by the way, scandals have always been there, big ones for that matter. And perhaps what I would have been looking for is some point of asking ourselves, why corruption? I know many Kenyans don't like corruption. Most people given to be corrupt and not to be corrupt, they would prefer not to be corrupt. So why do we finally end up there? And I go back to my social policy part of things, because you want to develop a Kenyan who is patriotic, who believes in this country, so that even if you have maybe 3 guys who are corrupt, 7 are not. And then you come also to the systems part of it, such that where I think my colleague here had mentioned about the efficiency. If you can get things done first, efficiently, you'll not be corrupt. And this can tell you, with the kind of transformation we've had with things like telephones. I think if you wanted a telephone 15, 20 years ago, you'd have had to give something to get a line. Today, you don't need that, because a combination of market-oriented public and private sector ability to produce goods whereby you don't have to bribe has managed to sort that matter out. Now, and then you must be able to be careful not to concentrate too much on punishing. I know that's what we like. You know, we like blood. When you see so-and-so is there. That is the end of the problem. The problem has already occurred. So if it's a disease, you don't concentrate on the end of curing the problem. In fact, you'll never cure it, because many times you can never recover all the amount. But you start from the bottom. That is the causes. And you understand, again, back to our sentiments, we develop a movement in this country where people believe that corruption is not the right way to go. And that means also dealing with other issues. For example, the cartels, which my colleague mentioned, the issues of tribalism, because the cocoons upon which you breed this corruption have some nature, cartels, tribalism, obviously gender, I want to say sexism also. All these come in. So you have to sort out the society at that social level. Then you come into the administrative part, which is where now EACC, DPP, the judiciary come in. And the thing is that we got a new constitution, which has very high, standards. But the link between all these institutions is not there. So Parliament should sit down and write up the laws which will join up the faces of the anti-corruption movement from EACC to DPP to judiciary, where files get dropped, the standards of investigation. And finally, which is something I've always said should be done, is the issue of asset recovery. We must be able to see the assets recovered, and because my problem is I'm an accountant, and I know there is no way you can pay 1 billion shillings into an account and nobody knows where the money has gone. Is it possible? Not possible. We know where the money went. It went maybe to Modoni, it went to Okello, it went to Kabara. Finally, where did the money end up? So we know where those assets are. And then we recover them and we tell them, look, actually, that building which belonged to Kasam, we have got it back. Here it is. It's now government. The finishing of the whole process.
Okay.
So that network needs to be there.
Okay, we'll be coming back to continue this corruption conversation. It's one that we cannot exhaust even on budget day altogether. We'd like to cross over to the county of Uasin Gishu once again in Eldoret, where Kevin Mutai is standing by with a conversation in our Eldoret studios. Kevin, over to you.
Thank you so much, Dan. And once again, we are glad to join the budget conversation from here in Eldoret in Uasin Gishu County. And here we're trying to focus on the issue of the 3 trillion shillings budget Remember, the president has been going round advocating for completing, or rather using his 4-pillar agenda to help the citizen. And for him, if he sees that with those in regards to infrastructure, good health care services, and among others, will be able to transform the lives of Kenyans. And with me here is my guest, Samson Wanjama, who is a businessman here in Eldoret town. And Wanjama, we're talking about 3 trillion shillings here.
Yes.
Where do you think the government is financing this budget from?
What I think the government will go to the taxpayers, and a big challenge is the way they'll get this money from the taxpayers, and the ways they will use to get this money from the taxpayers. So the challenge is, the budget is big, but how are they going to get this huge of budget from the taxpayers? Yes.
And when you talk about debts, the government has been incurring lots of debts from other countries and other like local investors. Do you think that how is the government going to ensure that all these debts will be repaid in good time?
Okay, I've seen the budget. The previous budget was 2.6 trillion, and they've increased it up to 3.7 trillion. They have considered the debt that the other countries are owing Kenya. So I think the way they've increased the budget, I think they've considered the debt that the current debt that the other currents are owing Kenya. Yes.
As a resident of Eldoret, we are talking of the president, the 4 pillars of the president.
Yes.
As a resident of Uasin Gishu County, whereby largely people here are large-scale producers of agricultural produce or other products, where do you think exactly that most of these monies should be directed to in order to help most farmers here in Eldoret?
I've seen the challenge that currently we will have, it's about the allocation. You see, we have the big 4 agendas, and that is manufacturing, food security, universal health care, and the affordable housing. To me, is how they will allocate the budget to balance these 4 big agendas. Currently in Uasin Gishu County, basically what I can say is about the food stuff. We grow food stuff here in Uasin Gishu County. So I think the bigger budget need to go to the food stuff, because there is where the common mwananchi lies. You see, when there's when there is food stuff and it's affordable, I think the government need to sort the food stuff in a bigger way. So they need to allocate, I think, a bigger amount to the food stuff.
Okay, when you talk about food security in the country, we are saying that Uasin Gishu County produces, it actually farmers, largely, most of the farmers actually go into wheat and maize growing. So we are seeing some of the farmers are complaining that the government has delayed in terms of releasing the monies through the National Cereals and Produce Board. So do you think how can that affect the production of these crops in the region?
The government, there's a lot of delays in paying the farmers. And secondly, the farmers are being affected currently, especially with the climate. There's a lot of things that are challenging the farmers. There's the pests, there are those things that are affecting the farmers. So I think what the government needs to do, it needs to come up with inventive ways on which they will put on the foodstuffs, so that the cost of production, or rather the cost of growing like wheat or like maize, it will reduce on the cost.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much, Sam. I'm told that my time is up, and people are already gathering at the parliament, and we need to also go to other places to get other coverage from different parts of the country. But for now, Dan, those are just a few sentiments that we managed to sample from here in Eldoret, and I'm sure that we'll be speaking to other residents whom will be able to tell their view, what they're expecting in the budget. But for now, Dan, I take it back to you in studio.
Thank you very much, Kevin Mutai, coming to us from the county of Uasin Gishu, specifically in Eldoret town at our studios there. And coming back to our conversation here, and we had begun speaking about corruption. And Muthoni had, gone quite expansively on the issues of corruption and going down to the social aspect of it, considering that not all these people who we see stealing at high-level office began when they were there. Or, it began with, someone gave an example that it began with the young boy who saw his father overlapping in traffic, and when he went to the school tuck shop, he did not, follow the queue. He went and jumped the queue. Elvis, what options are there in terms of policy that can be put to try and deal with the social elements of corruption?
I believe one of the things we need to do is to ensure that we walk the talk. So when we say we are dealing with corruption, then we are actually seeing results, filtering through, right to the top. We have lots of reports about perceived corruption in government institutions, and not forgetting what everyone is saying, that corruption is now devolved to the counties, carried out by the Auditor General. And I'm sure if there was a follow-up to ensure that whatever the Auditor General's recommendations are in terms of measures to be taken, if you're putting in controls, looking at it really as a business case where you need to ensure that there's accountability for monies that have been disbursed, right through to what the spend is, and if there's any issues in terms of misappropriation, then we are seeing someone being held to account for that.
Okay, Dennis, we've seen a number of times when the government is coming to fight corruption, and at times it has been said to be a PR stunt because we don't eventually get to the bottom of, you don't actually see the real fish getting, behind bars. What do we need to do? What needs to be done? What does Rotich need to put into his budget to ensure that we can actually see that this renewed energy to fight corruption is actually realistic?
I think Rotich has done what he can. If I'm not wrong, EACC's budget is up from last year. But it's not him. I think it's about leadership. It's about political leadership. I think there's now an emerging understanding that we have enough law and policy to deal with bureaucratic corruption. In other words, inside the government, petty corruption, we're doing things like Huduma centers and so on, right? Digitizing, e-citizen, all of these things are removing the petty and the kind of office corruption. I think what's missing is the political side, because increasingly corruption and politics are intertwined. And I think that is beyond Rotich, unless he's going to put some money into the handshake. I don't know if he's putting any money into the handshake, because I assume the handshake is supposed to be dealing with those things.
Ashif.
I see, 4 different aspects that need to be addressed. I think the first is our constitution. Our constitution actually promotes corruption. This whole issue of democracy and the modern democracy of who funds biggest elections wins, you need to recover that money from somewhere. Okay? So we really need to look at our democracy and the way we see the democracy in the olden days was to have the best guy win the election, not the most richest guy who can, use Twitter and, Facebook to, spear propaganda to win. Okay? So we really need a deep look at our democratic model, and is it the right model? Because I think that's partly funding corruption or fueling corruption. The second thing is the ethics. I think the ethics, you can't teach corruption and ethics at university. You need to teach it right through the nursery, from nursery right up to the university, and create a cult, okay, of what we are not going to do. Okay, and if there is that cult and everybody believes, then as Mudhoni said, if there are 10 people who don't believe, the other 3 will be forced to come that way. That's the second part. And how do we promote that ethics? How do we make people swear that I'm not corrupt? Okay, and be that club of I'm not corrupt. Okay, the third is the issue of systems and transparency. Okay, what we are doing currently is bringing a lot of, and something like iTax. If you can link it to everybody's bank account and know what money somebody holds, where are you going to put your money? Because you only put your money in land, in bank accounts or in shares. Track all the movements of what is happening there through a system, especially the income coming out of it. And automatically when you do that, and there is transparency in the procurement process, corruption will itself, have a problem in raising its head, because if it raises its head, the systems will kill it. And finally, I think the whole issue of prosecution, which is the last ambit, because you also need some prosecution to set examples, that has to be fast-tracked. The problem is, if you can't prosecute a case within, 2 to 3 weeks, it's already too weak. So you need courts that where prosecution cases go, there is no stopping. Everybody knows. We can actually sort out whole election disputes, okay, within a whole week. or 2 weeks, and people have to abide by it. Why can't we do that with corruption? Set those courts, and you're not going home until a ruling is done. Okay? And if the time is short, you can't go and buy witnesses, you can't go and buy judges, you can't do all these things within that time. You're so much focused on just preparing your defense, you won't have time to do other things. And when the topic is hot, even the taker on the other side will be very frightened to give a long opinion, an incorrect opinion or incorrect judgment. But if it's 3 years, people have forgotten. It's very easy to give an incorrect judgment because of corruption. Corruption on top of corruption. And I think that those are the 4 pillars that we need to look. And you cannot have any one which is bigger than the other. All 4 have to work together.
Muthoni, what would a Kenya without corruption look like?
By the way, that's normally the starting point, because when you want people to change religion, when they want them to be Christians, you tell them about heaven, So you must develop a vision of a Kenya without corruption. And a Kenya without corruption is a Kenya where, first of all, minimum, we have lots of respect for each other. Despite, different in our diversity. For example, the issue of equality, issue of just human contact with respect. When you go to queue, you don't jump the queue. When you come to the airport, you don't select the local ladies, the Kenyan ladies, decide they are the ones who carry contraband goods, and you let everybody else pass. So it is it's a place where you will enjoy. It's a place where if you lost your child, you'd be able to find the child because the village comes to help. It's a place where if you lost your bag, you'd find it. So we still haven't constructed that vision so that people know, if I'm not corrupt and I don't have that 4-story apartment block, what will be my future? How will I feel? He will be happy in living in 1-bedroom apartment, but he is a Kenyan and he knows this is a country with ethics and I'm taken care of by the society in total. It's a difficult thing to do because he'd rather have the 4 apartments or the 5 apartments which are giving him maybe 30,000 shillings a month. It is that which we give our leaders the job of constructing. Just like you talk about religion again, they tell you when you believe, you feel very good and you're not being given money. So here you are being told, if we run this country like a family, like a community, without racial barriers, without gender barriers, without having to pay something, then I'd be feeling very good. And that pride comes with a lot of, you will realize so many other things, because that's what we were talking about, economic sentiment. Trust, the fact that you can trust people. They will be ready to invest in your country. They'll be ready to partner. In many countries, in many cases in Kenya where two people partner in a business, it's just a matter of years before they break up because one partner is cheating the other one. So that trust will help us now, develop very, very, very fast and also enjoy being Kenyan, which is a very big point. We have never done that really. I think we started off after independence and then somewhere along the line, everybody could see that one has more than me and then we start fighting over it. It's a really, really good feeling. You know you can walk in town without somebody snatching your bag. You know you can leave your laptop in the car park and you find it there. Imagine even our blood pressure medicine may come down. The way I mean, you just feel happy to be in this particular country, but it doesn't come without some level of leadership, without some level of being sensible about it. You can see it in some countries. I think Singapore is one of the countries, and they started by, first of all, people respecting each other. If you go into an airport, for example, I think Mauritius is another one. They will shuttle you in. They will not look at, this one is from Africa, this one is from where. But in Kenya, you can see the profiling, even at the airport. You can see the profiling of people at the airport. So you start feeling bad right from the entry point of the country. So it's now the social, back to the social part, besides now the financial element. Yeah.
Elvis, She's painting, a very nice picture, may put it that way, but how realistic and how achievable is it, considering where we are now? She has painted heaven to some extent. But are we in hell? Are we very close to hell? And how savable are we?
Not really. I think it is achievable. She gave the example of Singapore. Singapore was probably much lower than where we were. We are talking about 2/3 of the population living in slum-like conditions. But the fact that they have a shared vision, and values, really looking at the social fabric to say, what do we as a people want to achieve? Looking at the example of the family, there's no cause for one to want to step on another because you all have shared values as a family. I'm not implying that Kenya can be one big family, but if we have shared values, then that is very achievable. We need to deal with the very basics. Corruption is a symptom of greed. I believe if everyone has what it needs, what they would need as a very basic, and some of the measures being taken, for example, education. No child should not have education to university. So if everyone has an equal footing and has an opportunity to succeed in society, then I believe that will reduce people wanting to take shortcuts to succeed.
Okay. Dennis, what, in your view, is corruption stealing from Kenya? Because, there's the actual theft of funds or of resources. But what, including funds, is it stealing from Kenya?
I think it's stealing futures. It's stealing hope. It's making us more cynical about things like the law, institutions and law. Especially when, as Ashif was saying, if people are not being prosecuted, then basically anyone can do it. It's making us think of shortcuts. We've seen all these reports about young people saying corruption is not bad if I get ahead. I think the last survey done by the EACC said 6 out of 10 people believe corruption is a custom in Kenya. So that's where we are. That's actually where we are now. So there's a big culture thing, which is what Muthoni is saying, and then there's a kind of systematic thing that Ashif is talking about, and we're not there. And I think one of the things actually that a lot of people kind of joke about is if you removed corruption in Kenya, government may not move. Because there is now a feeling that government only works in instances where corruption is there. If we think about all this procurement that is now being, that the president now wants to have public, it's because he's seeing a real problem with procurement. Only the things where you can steal from are the ones being procured. So I think that's where we are. That's where we are. Kind of let me put the hell to Muthoni's heaven.
But just maybe to add, Okello mentioned about the greed. And I think we need to add that the reason why people become greedy is because of fear, insecurity, from sociology. Otherwise, if you put a child who's been without food for 20 days and one who is being forced to eat at home, the one who is being forced to eat at home, he'll say good riddance. So when people fear, they don't know the next day, then they become very greedy. So that the fear has to be contained, and that means even when you're prosecuting, you must learn to prosecute properly, not to victimize people. Because if you victimize people, they'll say, okay, I'll wait for you to catch up with me.
Are we then saying that the system as it is, I'll just take it back to you, Dennis, because you've alluded to it, is creating almost no room for good people of integrity?
I think it's squeezing a lot. Yes, I think it's squeezing out many. I think a lot of people are saying, if this is the way to go. In fact, I think if you look at a lot of people who join public service with exemplary private sector careers, I think you go in, you see a system there that is basically swallowing you, and you say, okay, either I leave it or I join it. Yeah, that's where we are now. Yeah. In fact, for me, you see, this is why I think Singapore did it so well on 2 levels. One is this whole dignity and respect for one another, the equality thing. But I think 2, and this is, I think, where the president has a challenge, he must rethink government. Not just in terms of the policies that it has, but in terms of the services it provides. In fact, I would actually say a corrupt, free government is a government with a balanced budget. We should be able to get all the 1.9 billion should be able to run our national government. That's where we should be going. But we're not.
Chief.
I think when Dennis, when Dennis was saying you're forced to do it, it is true that there is a lot of pressure. And, I had an instance where, a church organization comes to me and is giving me a contract. And then they say they wanted something, the accountants wanted something. And I said, first, I don't give something. But secondly, to give something to House of God or employees of the House of God is just unacceptable. But to them, it was normal because they're getting it. And I think that whole issue is that feel-good factor is not there. And feel-good factor only comes from the leadership. When people believe in a leadership, it's a whole issue of cult. If there are 3 or 4 people who do the right things, others will follow them. Whether it's in government, whether it's in crowds, and who is that 3 or 4 people? And that's why, yesterday, when I was here on Primetime News, I said one thing, that, President Kenyatta has done a very commendable job in what he's doing, trying to tackle corruption. There are 2 things I see. That number one, he's still not taking it in a holistic way, which, really needs to be looked at. But if he achieves what he's doing, okay, he will be the best president that this country has had by miles, okay. But if he doesn't, and with the escalating budget and everything, he'll be the worst president that this country has ever had.
You've said that, he's not doing it in a holistic way. What do you mean by that?
Because, we are trying to do some things, like, prosecution is one, but, are we trying to create that, the new government, this is the government I want, these are the people that are going to run it. And I know that these are guys who are going to run it the way I want it, okay? Are we doing ethics at the school level? Are we creating, a cult? Okay, you can't change a culture unless there is a cult around it. Okay, and football is a classic example. You'll die here arguing about Ronaldo and Messi, and you never met them, and you'll probably never meet them in your lives. Okay, but you believe in what they do. Okay, and that is a cult. Okay, and if you believe that the president is going to do this for us, and his stewards around him, the 4 or 5 guys who are driving the policy are going to do, will die for him, because at the end of the day, Kenyans love their country. There is no doubt about that. Okay? It is only that we are getting frustrated in the last 10 or 15 years because things are stuck. We are in a quagmire. How do we get out of it is the question, and we need to rethink that.
Wow. Corruption is quite a painful thing, especially for Kenyans. And sadly, you find nowadays, even if your car is stuck somewhere and someone helps you push it, you have to pay them. Yes. It's killing the human element of people, and now it even trickles down bit to business and the larger scale of the economy. And some of these things, some of the people who will argue that they're not paid well enough. For instance, we've had the cases where people have argued that, say, police will usually try and get the kitu kidogo because they feel that they're underpaid, and they would like to now, it's like their own private way of trying to boost their resources. That brings in the question about the wage bill, which is huge. How then does the government balance cutting down the wage bill and not creating too many unemployed people, so to speak, because they might have to cut down the number of people who work for the government? Dennis?
I would actually not touch the wage bill. I was involved with the retrenchment of, was it 2000, 20 years ago? I was part of the team that designed it. It was very interesting. When we did the financial calculations, it made sense to retrench. When you did the economic calculations, it didn't make sense. Because the economic calculations are saying what happens to the person when they leave. Right? Do they have a livelihood? And it depends on your age and your skills. So I now have the view that we need to shift it around. This is why I talk about rethinking government. Maybe we need to reskill civil servants to do new things more productively, make government more efficient at delivering service. So instead of cutting the staff, we improve the performance of government. That's what I would say. Because I think politically, retrenchment is a difficult one. Especially in an economy which is not creating jobs. You see, if there were jobs, if this was the US, there are opportunities everywhere. Right? Here, you're not creating jobs. We actually did a study. I'll tell you this. The first retrenchment in 1993, we did a study in the firm I was working for, and I think within the first 2 years, 60% of the people who had been retrenched were dead. And we still did it again. So some of these things we need to think about what is the positive way of dealing with it rather than the negative. That's the way I would look at it.
Elvis, what is your view on the same?
following the comments coming from Dennis. It's difficult to say cut and cut, but I would agree. Rethinking and being an enabler, creating the conducive environment, because what's the core business of government? It's not necessarily to be engaged in the day-to-day, because it's as a result of that you have the people to pay. We are looking at the example of housing. We have the National Housing Corporation, but we still want to establish another parastatal to deal with housing. So when you look at you as a player, an enabler rather than being a player in the whole space, then that would help. But of course, ensuring that there is job creation so that you don't end up plugging one hole and creating another.
Okay, Muthoni, do you feel that Rotich, for instance, has a serious dicey game to play when it comes to trying to cut the wage bill?
Yes, I think it's, first of all, it's normally very difficult politically to do that. And like Dennis has said, it has its, even the human part of it is very difficult. And yet for me, and I had said this before, the question is it that we don't need these people, or these people are not doing what they are supposed to be doing, or sufficient of what they are supposed to be doing? I have a case, for example, where I was hearing one of my colleagues saying that we hire cars. I think we are on some leasing system for cars with one of the motor vehicle dealers. But the car is leased per day. Then it comes in, it doesn't have fuel. So you will be paying for that car daily. The driver will be without a car because there is no fuel. So we go back to the issue of back to systems now. So and that's why we are saying we have to relook and maybe rethink, like Dennis is saying, we rethink government. How is it working, especially when you take into account that a lot of things have changed in terms of technology. A lot of ways of working have changed. That is whether the government is changing as things change, so that you ensure that these people are fully engaged. Because if it's a police car, for example, somebody is calling, there's a crime somewhere, the vehicle can't go, the driver is there, but it's because there's no fuel. So the systems now kick in. Then another thing is the issue of the concept of living wage. That everybody in the employment of the public sector must have a living wage, and that also affects corruption. Is it a salary somebody can live with? Because if you're being paid 20,000 is net of your salary, and you're supposed to hire a house, you have a family of 2. I don't know, this guy, when he gets on the road, he'll certainly demand your 2,000 bob. So, and at the same time, we have people, and I must say I was one of them at one time, who are paid so much, I won't tell you my salary, so many hundreds of thousands. And there's a room for what you can call, kind of smoothing or balancing. Because some people are paid so high, others are paid very low, and at least the bottom should have a living wage. And sitting down and calculating, if you are a policeman and you need a house, you have a wife and you have 2 children, what do you need to be able to live? Can you afford food? Can you afford whatever? If you are a prison warder somewhere and you need to pay, you need to live, how much do you need to in order to be able to do that? If you are a teacher in Nairobi, how much do you need in order to survive in a reasonable way? Then we go back and maybe cut the salaries of the PSs and the whatever and balance out. And then make sure each one of them is serving the public. And they have the tools to do that. For example, you can't pay people if you don't have the tools they are supposed to work with.
All right, and I'm informed that the CS Rotich is just about to step out of the Treasury building. We shall be monitoring that, as you can see on your screen at the top. right corner of your screen is the image of the National Treasury, and any minute now he should be walking out of the National Treasury buildings as he head. First of all, he's going to have the usual photo opportunities there, the photo ops that they usually have, and at the National Treasury we can see there's a bit of activity, not too much though, but usually at around this time you'll see some of the people from the Treasury stepping out. Then after that the CS is going to usually comes and then poses for the photos with his PS as well as those in charge of planning, and then we usually see him have a photo on his own with the ceremonial briefcase rather, which has the documents that he's going to be reading, and definitely it's a day he'll need quite some water. And so this again is a big day for him, especially as he sets out the first budget that is under the new tenure of President Uhuru Kenyatta with his Big Four agenda. And so what usually happens in this case, having covered this a number of years, you would see a bit of calculated activity around that exit point, which has as usual been draped with some drapings just because of the ceremonial nature of the event, and they always have to have the flower on their lapel, which just remains as a flower. Many people have moved on to different things when it comes to their grooming, but the National Treasury decides to stay that way. And now you could see some of the people who are people there just stepping out of the National Treasury, the revolving doors, which then precede the CS and his team coming out to pause for their photos before he can then make his walk to the Parliament buildings. And so, like I said, the activity that happens there just precedes usually the CS and his team walking out. There he is, Henry Rotich, the Cabinet Secretary of the National Treasury, coming out ready to go and read his budget. There we go, the ceremonial holding and showcasing of the briefcase with, like I said, the flower on his left lapel, and more often than not he'll always have his red tie on. It may be deliberate, maybe something that is just the usual for them, or just by chance, but that is now inside that briefcase is what is the proposed plan for your future as a Kenyan in regards to the government spending. And then, yes, like usually happens, he's going to be joined by some of the leaders at the National Treasury and those who are different stakeholders in the government, the top levels of government when it comes to the budget. And we expect as well Kamau Thuge, who's at the back there at the top of the stairs, that is the PS, the National Treasury, who is now joining him for the photo opportunity. That is Kamau Thuge, the PS at the National Treasury. And this takes not too long, takes a few minutes, and after that he may choose to walk. Some of the in the past, some of the ministers or CSs of finance or National Treasury now have opted to walk to Parliament. Some choose to still get into the cars and drive there, but we wait to see that Rotich will do the same. To the far left, joining the photo opportunity is Julius Muya. He's the PS planning. And so he also is part of that team that is responsible for the budget, and this has been a long number of weeks for them. Even trying to get them to comment on many things has not been as easy, because this has been their main focus, to make sure that they beat this deadline of June the 14th to be able to go and present the document to Parliament and to the country at large by extension, as they make sure that they have all they need to do in place, and especially with all these issues coming up, with all the concerns that are there. That is the Central Bank Governor, Patrick Njoroge, who has joined them for the photo opportunity. He's on the far right next to the PS, Kamau Thuge. And after this, ideally, there should be a larger photo opportunity with some of the other leaders of the National Treasury. After that, we shall be seeing them joining, rather separating to get the different vehicles if they choose to drive. We know President Uhuru Kenyatta, while he was the finance minister, chose to walk to Parliament, which for him would be something, again, in his personality, and also by virtue of being a politician, that was something that was had some flair to it, and so that was possibly why he chose to go that way. And there we go, the briefcase with the coat of arms on it, a significant one, and this is a photo opportunity, a photo that is being seen not only in Kenya but also across the region, with the different finance ministers presenting their budgets today to their respective parliaments. And we shall be getting reports on the same later on from our different correspondents, like in Uganda, where we have NTV Uganda, and we shall definitely be giving you information on the same. And in light of the fact that this budget that Kenya is having is larger, significantly larger than that of the other countries, as as well as its the size of the economy as well is also much, much larger. And so that is the picture that they have been waiting for, which pretty much symbolizes the beginning of the process that begins that in not too long we shall be having him head to the parliament grounds, to the parliament chambers, where he shall then go and present the budget. And so there we go. He's going to get into his vehicle. They usually have the vehicles put on a certain space. So I guess you see it, he's chosen not to walk there. He'll be taking a ride there. And after that, he shall be he'll be in parliament within the next few minutes, and we shall be having that shot as well. Hudhaifa Aden is there, and he has been standing by, speaking to some of the legislators there on their views, their hopes, their expectations, and with not much resistance to this, because after what we mentioned here, the handshake changed some of the dynamics when it comes to how the government gets criticized by the opposition. It has not been as harsh since, and we hope that, the hope that Kenyans have is that it's not going to cost Kenyans some credible kind of watchdog role by virtue of the handshake. And so those are the shots that we have, and we know we are going to be taking a ride with him. As a matter of speaking, our vehicle will be right ahead of, not too far ahead of his. He's going to be escorted, of course, by police as they head to the parliament grounds, which is not too far. It's less. It should be about a kilometer at the most. Then he shall be welcomed by the leaders of the National Assembly and the Senate as well. And then what also happens at such events, we have not only the parliamentarians speaking, we also have others. You could see journalists working hard to make sure they get their good pictures and get the story all the way, as we have the ceremonial part of this whole event happening as he heads to Parliament. And you can see the security teams having to keep up with the vehicle. It's a big day for them as well. It's a big day for Kenya in regards to the budget and the rest of the issues around that and the concerns that are there. And aside from that, we also know there are issues that are bedeviling the economy, which include unemployment, high unemployment rates, and many people who do not have jobs, which is actually taking a hit on security in some cases. And we see many times, we've heard of testimonials of people saying that by virtue of not having jobs, they are unable to secure some sort of income, understandably. And so some of them, unfortunately, resort to crime, which then again becomes a negative aspect. And so that's something else that the CS is going to be, people will be looking to the CS to see how we can provide some sort of way out, especially in light of the Big Four agenda, and one of them being manufacturing. And with manufacturing being one of the Big Four agenda, we know that it's one of the aims is to create jobs. The government has not hit its annual target of creating 1 million jobs every year. It has been falling short, not by too far in the sense that it doesn't go to about 50%. It hits about 80% of its target, but it is yet to get its target every year. So that is the vehicle in which the Cabinet Secretary to the National Treasury, Henry Rotich, is in as he heads down to Parliament buildings, where he shall then go, and after not too long, he should be presenting the budget statement, and that should be within the next 15 or so minutes, because ideally he is meant to be beginning at around 3:30, and this is Harambee Avenue, the roundabout there, where he's now about to join the Parliament Road there. Where he's going to be, he's pretty much there, because like we said, it's not a long distance. So even for those who used to walk, like President Uhuru Kenyatta at his time while he was the finance minister, it was not too long a walk. I guess some of them needed the walk after the heavy brain work they had to do over the long number of days they've had, the long nights they'd had to spend as they prepared to present the budget. And so that is the convoy that is taking the team leading the Treasury, the team that is putting forward a plan and proposals to how your money as taxpayers is meant to be spent, and how what we cannot afford can still be factored in by way of loans and the likes. And so we wait to see what this holds in store for Kenyans who have been speaking about, how the cost of living is high for them, and those who have been having concerns on the same. A lot of concerns about corruption as well, which have been part of our discussions here. And so we see that the Cabinet Secretary has quite a lot on his plate, and the government at large has a lot on their plate, as we have the fight the fight against corruption going on strong, and we now see that after this there's a lot of expectation and a lot, but some people have really contained the expectation, managed the expectations to ensure that they do not mismanage and get to a point where they hope for more than what they can actually get at a time when the country is recovering from a challenging economic time that was in 2017, especially in light of the extended electioneering period as well as drought. And however, the tide changed, and this year it became a challenge with floods, and we still have a number of people who are still having humanitarian challenges, humanitarian crises, which seem to be looming in some areas. We have disease that has been looming in some areas, which we find people saying that it is largely because of the floods. The Red Cross has been helping to this end, and so we wait to see what will also be given to disaster management. We see the CS once again has already arrived at Parliament, and he's then again been received by some of the leaders of Parliament. We see he's been received by the leaders, the majority leader of the National Assembly, Aden Duale. We also have the Kikuyu MP, Kimani Ichung'wah, as well as other leaders there who have received the duo and their team, that is the CS and the PS, as well as the team they have with them as they arrive at Parliament, which is where they're going to be having the tabling of the document and just reading out. It could take up to 2 hours of reading the budget, and you know it is quite a tedious task for him. But however, this is what today is really about, and setting forward the pace. And we know there's a number of these things are meant to be put in place by the beginning of the next financial year, which is in July. On July the 1st, that means we have less than 2 weeks to that, just about 2 weeks actually, considering today is the 14th, which is just about halfway through the month. And so today being the 14th, so we see the security team now trying to clear the way for the CS and the PS and the rest of the team, as well as the leadership of the Parliament to get in so that we can get the ball rolling. So in not too long, we shall see the procession getting into Parliament, and after that we shall cross over fully to Parliament and listen into what the CS is going to be reading out as the event begins. And so this is just part of the ceremonial part of the day that has begun, where he gets out of the National Treasury building, has his pause in regards to, he pauses with his briefcase alongside some of his colleagues, first alone, then with his colleagues. Then after that, he makes his small journey, his small trip to Parliament, after which he then takes another set of photos as he's been welcomed by the leaders of Parliament. And after that, we then have him get into the Parliament buildings and to the chambers, where he shall then begin to have the statement being read out. And so we shall be following that up. In not too long, we shall be crossing over fully to Parliament, where we shall be having the CS presenting the same. And so for now, we just come back to our conversation in studio, which as we come to a close, so that we can then hand over and listen into the budget there. And one thing we've not spoken about really is, we've mentioned it in passing partly, is unemployment. It's a significant challenge. Ashif, what are the options that he has? I know this part of the Big Four agenda is, manufacturing and industrializing the country, which would then bring jobs. Aside from that, what options does he have in terms of just trying to create jobs and value jobs?
I think overall is just growing the economy at 7 to 7.5%, and not only focusing on agriculture, but overall value addition, value creation, focusing on tourism, which I think is a big, ticket item which we are not exploiting. And lastly, I think the overall issue is creating that security that brings foreign direct investments and making the investment climate much easier than what it is now.
Okay, Muthoni, what's your take on the unemployment issue?
Of course, unemployment is a major issue, and it's not only for Kenya. But what I think in our countries we need to think about is our level of competitiveness as a country, and also realizing that we cannot design our economies for a local area. Our economies have to match the competitiveness deserved by the world. That is, if you make a product here, it has to be able to compete with the rest of the world. We also have to realize that the certain competitive advantages we had, especially as a country, say for example in the East African region, whereby when Tanzania was socialist, when Uganda was at war, when Rwanda was at war, are not going to be like that anymore. they are already having economies which can compete. So we must up the game. That is, we go back to fundamentals and say, if, for example, they are producing unga, can we be able to compete in terms of quality, in terms of price? And that brings me back to the price strategy, which is never features when you're dealing a lot in public economics. We never look at price of goods. And we need to go back and, I don't know what we call them, re-engineer ourselves to be able to compete at that level. You can see that even there is a big shift in the demand of goods from Kenya, for example, in COMESA. Why? Because if you want cement, Tanzania can now produce cement. So are we going to be competitive enough here in Kenya to be able to retain the market in Tanzania? And if we lose that market, where will the production we have, the capacity we have go? So that competitiveness issue has to come in. And then when it comes to tourism, for example, the products we produce, are they going to be competitive in the world? Are they going to be able to compete with South Africa, with the new markets such as Mozambique, with the new rising Tanzania? So we must ask ourselves those questions and support the ability to produce goods and services to compete in those areas. For example, in tourism, our hotels are old. A lot of them are quite old. To refurbish them, you need a lot of money to bring them to that level. So are we going to have a financial policy or an economic policy which can support the refurbishment of all our coast hotels to be the right to compete with a hotel, say a new hotel in Mozambique? And at the same time, we think about things like security, because it's a comprehensive package. If you don't have security, then you cannot have a good attraction. So you have to go back and invest in security. So that is where I think our issue is, the issue of competitiveness, the issue that the people we originally could beat in the market now are coming up after us. And the fact that we're in a global market, we have to compete at that level. You can't say, I'll build a hotel which is for Kenyan market only. It has to be international, it has to be regionally competitive. Thank you.
Elvis, on the same, just employment, even just expanding the conversation, have we created enough awareness on different jobs? Because we're trying to create jobs in away from the conventional ones, especially coming from a time when good jobs are considered to be, if you do medicine, engineering, account. There were specific lines of career that many people were directed towards when they were in school. But over time, there have been efforts to try and expand the job base, may put it that way. Has enough been done to ensure that people can actually get interest and actually feel, I'm going to put my life into this?
I think we are beginning to get out of that. I would say for some of us, growing up in the old education system, employment just meant blue-collar employment or white-collar employment. But when you look at what we are doing right now in terms of changing the education system and thinking about competencies more than just attaining scores and opening up, being innovative about our thinking about the opportunities that are there, not just in manufacturing but services. I know there are initiatives, for example, the Ajira project that is looking at online jobs. So we should not just be limited to, we can only be employed within the boundaries of our country. We could actually export services by opening up opportunities on the online space. So yes, initially, one would always think that it has to be the traditional agro-based that one would either get into, or the blue-collar employment. But now we're looking at the youth also being very entrepreneurial. So if we can facilitate that and ensure that the ideas are nurtured to create employment and wealth, that will be useful in rethinking it.
Dennis, just in closing, because I can see the speaker has already begun to do his welcoming remarks, and we've seen CS Rotich has already sat down. Your quick thoughts on the aspect of unemployment?
I think I agree with everything that has been said. Productivity, competitiveness. I think we need a mindset change. Not formal jobs, but livelihoods or income. I like to call them income opportunities. I think we need to think about Kenya not as a, when we think of Kenya's GDP, we think of Kenya like a profit and loss account. We need to think of Kenya as a balance sheet, so that we are building all our capitals: human capital, knowledge, social capital, our infrastructure, financial capital, and so on. So for me, it's a mindset change that needs to happen. Means thinking about our capitals, thinking about opportunities of income, thinking about counties as the basis for jobs through economic hubs, for example. So I think for me, there are so many spaces that I think we can start exploiting now.
And do you feel that enough has been done to actually create these opportunities?
No, because I think we're still moving, as Evans has said, we're moving now, Elvis, we're moving into thinking about jobs which are not necessarily white-collar jobs or traditional blue-collar jobs. We're thinking about, it is said that 60% of the jobs for young in the next 20 years have not even been created because they have not even been designed. Right? So if we're thinking about digital Kenya 2030, 2035, 60% of those jobs are not there. So we really need a mindset change. We are starting, but we have a long way to go, I think.
And especially when you look in terms of when you go into industrialization and you find there's a lot of factories, and these factories are now becoming more technology savvy. Yeah. So it means that you've got less jobs. And what's the shift? What's the shift between, we've been having a factory employing 300 people, but now because of the new technology they've invested in, they only need 70. So there's a whole 230 who are left jobless. But has enough been done to make sure there's a smooth transition for them to get jobs online? Hashif, as we close.
I think there is a very key element, and I don't think so we have thought about realigning people. Our education system is very rigid. We don't train people to research and live on their own. And, as Dennis said, people are going to, change up to 5 or 6 jobs in totally different, areas. And that skilling comes with the education system.
Right. And I think in not too long we should see the CS begin his speech, reading out his budget statement. And I've been having in studio a very insightful panel: Ashif Kassam, the executive chairman of RSM; Elvis Ogeto, the partner RSM; Muthoni Wangai, an FCPA representing ISPAC; and Dennis Kabara, who is an economist and public finance expert. Thanks for speaking to us, giving us insight and of your time and all other resources to ensure that we make some sense of what's going to be happening, what's about to happen right now, as we cross over to Parliament, where we have the CS getting on to his speech.
This is the first time, this is the first budget following the conclusion of the general election last year. Allow me to congratulate those who were re-elected and those who are serving for the first time in this August House. I look forward for working closely with all of you in order to achieve our development goals. Mr. Speaker, while delivering the State of the Nation address early this year, His Excellency President Uhuru Kenyatta reminded us of the journey we have traveled as a nation in building a stronger democratic society. This democracy has strengthened our collective belief in justice and our aspiration for an inclusive and shared prosperity. Mr. Speaker, as a country, we have come a long way since 2013. At that time, when His Excellency President Uhuru Kenyatta took office in 2013, there were numerous constraints to economic growth. For example, we had a huge infrastructure gaps in roads, rail, air transport, as well as challenges at our ports. Our capacity to generate energy was limited mainly to unreliable hydro and costly thermal sources. We needed to modernize our education sector to enable training of skilled manpower. Our health facilities were overstretched, with families struggling with communicable diseases and inadequate modern treatment facilities. Above all, we faced the challenge of rolling out the devolved system of government with 47 counties as enshrined in our Constitution. Mr. Speaker, faced with these challenges, the Jubilee administration designed and implemented an economic transformation plan under 5 key pillars, involving 1, improving the business climate by maintaining macroeconomic stability, addressing security challenges, reducing the cost of doing business; 2, closing the infrastructure gap; 3, investing in key sectors such as manufacturing, agriculture, and tourism; 4, sharing prosperity by investing in poor programs in health, education, and social welfare programs; and 5th, fully supporting devolution. The plan we chose in 2013 has worked and is delivering positive results to our people. Mr. Speaker, let me mention a few of the key achievements under that plan. During the past 5 years, our economy has expanded by an average of 5.6% per year, outperforming the average growth rate of previous 5 years of 2008-2012, and that of the global economy and of sub-Saharan Africa. We are now relishing the benefits of an expanded economy that's more competitive and well-rated, not only in the East African region, but also in the whole of Africa. We have completed phase 1 of the standard gauge rail, SGR. Today, Kenyans are enjoying cheaper and faster travels between Mombasa and Nairobi using Madaraka Express. In addition, the SGR freight service started in January 2018 has facilitated cheaper movement of goods, with the monthly loads increasing from the initial 22,345 metric tons to an impressive 213,559 metric tons, a tenfold increase in only a few months. We have expanded our energy generation capacity through investment in green energy. Today, 6.7 million Kenyans have been connected to electricity compared to 2.3 in 2013. Security has been substantially improved throughout the country thanks to our strategic investments in police and military modernization. Our tourism sector continues on a recovery path, largely due to improved security in the country and effective tourism promotion strategies. We have significantly eased the burden of medical expenditure. As a result, more Kenyans are accessing specialized treatment than ever before. We have also made education more inclusive and sensitive to the country's skills demand by expanding the free education program to include free day secondary education, to introduce a new curriculum that focuses on nurturing talent and delivering new and upgraded technical training institutes across the country. And finally, more vulnerable Kenyans are benefiting from cash transfers, especially our senior citizens, orphans, vulnerable children, and persons with disabilities. Mr. Speaker, notwithstanding these significant achievements, we are aware that a lot remains to be done in order to decisively deal with the pressing challenges of unemployment, poverty, and inequality that Kenyans continue to face. It is for this reason that His Excellency the President has directed us to focus on 4 key strategic areas under the Big Four plan that will help create jobs and transform the lives of Kenyans. Mr. Speaker, achieving these strategic objectives will require that all of us will pull in the same direction. In this context, that His Excellency the President has urged us to put our differences aside, build bridges, and focus on serving our people for a better Kenya. This is a profound and timely call, consistent with the unifying vision of our forefathers. This has rekindled our sense of purpose and triggered a new sense of renewal. Mr. Speaker, consistent with this vision, the budget we present today is an opportunity to begin to walk this talk, and more importantly, to boldly confront the challenges we face today of getting employment for our youth, improving the lives of our people, and sharing the benefits of our economic progress. Accordingly, the theme of this year's budget is creating jobs, transforming lives, and sharing prosperity. Mr. Speaker, building a united nation is in which every Kenyan has a decent living, access to economic opportunities, and a chance to pursue their dreams is the pressing challenge facing us as a nation, and one that the budget must speak to. All of us, therefore, must heed the President's call to boldly address the underlying challenges and work hard together in order to achieve our national aspiration. Mr. Speaker, we must now seize the opportunity to accelerate our economic growth, create jobs for our youth, reduce poverty, and share our prosperity. This is because we have a government and a president who is fully committed to this resolve. We have a favorable global economic and trading environment. Our domestic economic outlook is bright. We have a fiscal plan that supports growth, provides funds for our devolved government while ensuring our debt remains sustainable. Our exchange rate, interest rates, and inflation outlook are stable. We have development partners that are ready to provide both financial and non-financial support. We have foreign investors knocking on our doors and eager to invest in our country. We have creative and enthusiastic homegrown entrepreneurs ready to expand their opportunities. And above all, our political environment has improved significantly over the recent months, thanks to the handshake. Mr. Speaker, in the budget for 2018-2019 that I will present shortly, we have balanced the need to provide resources to key priority areas to support enablers and drivers of Big Four plan and accelerate economic growth, while at the same time ensuring that our public debt remain on a sustainable path. Mr. Speaker, given the compelling needs for our limited resources, given the competing needs of our limited resources, we have had to make tough choices. We have curtailed resources going to low priority areas following the zero-based budgeting approach that we have adopted. This has enabled us to redirect these savings towards the Big Four and their enablers, while continuing with proper expenditures in health, education, and protecting the vulnerable. We are clearly conscious of our limited fiscal space, and we will be leveraging on the partnership between the private sector and the government to deliver most of the Big Four requirements. Overall, we have moderated our spending and ensured cautious revenue projection so as to limit borrowing. Obviously, there are risks and spending pressures that we will need to manage prudently. Mr. Speaker, the rest of my statement focuses on economic context around which this budget is prepared and details of various strategies aimed at creating jobs and transforming the lives of Kenyans under the Big Four plan. Thereafter, I will broadly outline the fiscal policy and the budget framework for 2018-2019 budget, together with the tax proposals and priority expenditures, as well as critical structural reforms that we intend to implement. Mr. Speaker, we recently completed our third medium-term plan, MTP3, which will guide us in achieving sustainable development goals, as well as our Vision 2030 development objectives. Achieving our development agenda will require robust implementation of the policies and programs outlined under the Big Four plan. We need to do this by seizing the investment opportunities presented by the improving global and domestic environment. Global growth is projected to improve by 3.9. Global growth is projected to improve to 3.9% in 2018 and 2019 from 3.8% in 2017. This growth momentum is supported by a rebound in investment, trade, and industrial production, coupled with strengthened business and consumer confidence. Equally, Mr. Speaker, economic growth in sub-Saharan Africa is recovering, with growth projected at 3.4% in 2018, up from 2.8% in 2017. The improved global and regional economic outlook will benefit Kenya's exports, further strengthening our growth prospects, and most specifically, our manufacturing sector. As you will recall, Mr. Speaker, Kenya recently ratified the African Continental Free Trade Area. It's important that we take full advantage of this new trading frontier to further enhance Kenya's trade prospects in the region. Mr. Speaker, on the domestic front, we faced significant challenges last year, particularly the severe drought and the prolonged electioneering period. Despite these challenges, our economy remained resilient, expanding by 4.9% in 2017, supported by strong public investment and macroeconomic stability. As a result, we generated an additional 898,000 jobs, new jobs in 2017, up from 833,000 jobs in 2016. Mr. Speaker, we project the economy to grow by at least 5.8% this year, supported by growing investor confidence, improved agricultural activities, bolstered by favorable weather, ongoing public investment, and improved demand for our exports due to improved global and regional growth. Over the medium term, decisive implementation of the Big Four plan should result in faster economic growth of at least 7% per year, which in turn should support job creation and reduce poverty among Kenyans. Mr. Speaker, despite the extremely difficult circumstances we faced as a country last year, we were able to preserve macroeconomic stability with inflation, interest rates, and exchange rate remain largely stable throughout 2017. This serves as a clear demonstration to domestic as well as foreign investors of our commitment to maintain macroeconomic stability, which is key in enhancing investor confidence. We intend to sustain this commitment in the years to come. Mr. Speaker, we will continue to improve the environment of businesses to thrive, for businesses to thrive, deal decisively with corruption, and address the governance and performance challenges at our parastatals and state-linked companies, as well as improve efficiency in our financial sector. All these measures will boost investment and create the much-needed jobs. Mr. Speaker, under the we target to boost manufacturing activities, enhance food and nutrition security, achieve universal health coverage, and support the construction of at least 500,000 affordable houses by 2022. On manufacturing, Mr. Speaker, we plan to increase the contribution of the manufacturing sector to GDP to 15% by 2022 by adding between $2 to $3 billion to our GDP. It is expected that this will increase manufacturing sector jobs by more than 800,000. Mr. Speaker, this will be achieved through establishing leather parks and textile industries in various parts of the country, reviving and transforming industries such as blue economy and manufacturing of construction materials, and re-establishing the automobile industry, which will make new vehicles more affordable. Mr. Speaker, we will target investors that are ready to invest in specific areas by providing tailor-made incentives, some of which are in my tax proposal that I will outline in this statement. Already, one investor is setting base in Eldoret, benefiting from incentives offered under the Special Economic Zones Act. The government will provide land in Naivasha for potential investors interested in setting up their activities in the Special Economic Zone to benefit from the SGR and cheap geothermal power generated nearby. We will also conclude the mode of financing the development of the Dongo Kundu Special Economic Zone in Mombasa, among others. Mr. Speaker, we are taking action to remove non-trade barriers within the East African Community region. Together with our East African partner states, we are working on the framework for the implementation of the East African Community Non-Tariff Barriers Act 2017. In addition, we have established an online reporting mechanism for non-tariff barriers. Further, we have embarked on the review of the common external tariffs to enhance protection of industries in the region that is expected to be completed in the coming financial year. Meanwhile, we have stay of application on some of the sensitive products before completion of the review. Mr. Speaker, in order to reduce the cost of production for our manufacturers, we have cut the cost of off-peak power by half, and we plan to implement modalities of bringing the cost of energy to about 9 cents per kilowatt hour to selected investors. We are reviewing work permits to accommodate expatriates whose skills supports our development agenda. We will continue to expand infrastructure and land access targeting manufacturing zone. Mr. Speaker, illicit and counterfeit trade rob us of revenue to fund critical programs and retard our progress towards industrialization. To deal with this, our multi-agency team comprising of the Kenya Bureau of Standards, Kenya Revenue Authority, and Anti-Counterfeit Agency are coordinating efforts to identify, seize, and destroy counterfeit goods. Already, the actions taken have yielded results. On food security, Mr. Speaker, we plan to grow enough food to feed our people at affordable price. Achieving this will require enhancing large-scale production by placing an additional 700,000 acres of land through PPP and by promoting investments in post-harvest handling, as well as adopting contract farming and other commercial off-taking arrangements. including supporting the development of agro parks and hubs to serve as a link to farmers and markets. Mr. Speaker, we will also support smallholder farmers by upscaling crop and livestock insurance and promoting use of appropriate farming techniques in addition to availing affordable credit facilities. On housing, Mr. Speaker, access to adequate and affordable housing remain a key concern in Kenya. It is estimated that the country's urban centers face a shortage of 200,000 housing units annually, and this shortage will rise to 300,000 units by 2020 on current policies. At the moment, only about 50,000 new housing units are being constructed every year. Mr. Speaker, every Kenyan has a right to a decent shelter. To meet this requirement, we plan to increase the supply of affordable houses by partnering with the private sector to develop homes in service land. This will require reforms in property registration, access to affordable financing, and adoption of new low-cost building technologies, which we are prepared to undertake under the Big Four plan. Already, Mr. Speaker, with a view to extending long-term loans to financial institutions secured against mortgages, we have established the Kenya Mortgage Refinance Company, KMRC, which will be jointly owned by the government, the private sector, and select development partners. This company was incorporated in April this year and has started raising capital. Mr. Speaker, we have also developed a comprehensive housing package that will incentivize the private sector in the construction of low-cost housing. This includes reduction of the corporate tax rate to 15% for developers who construct at least 100 units per year. Additionally, we plan to establish a National Social Housing Development Fund and strengthen the National Housing Corporation to take up more strategic roles in resource mobilization and management of tenant purchase schemes and provide alternative financing strategies for low-cost housing and associated social and physical infrastructure. Mr. Speaker, in order to promote development of low-cost housing for Kenyans, I propose to amend the Employment Act to provide that an employer shall contribute to the National Housing Development Fund in respect of each employee in his or her employment of 0.5% of the employee's gross monthly emolument, subject to a maximum of 5,000 shillings, while the employee will contribute 0.5% of their monthly gross earnings. Mr. Speaker, we intend to roll out universal health coverage to all households by 2022, so as to guarantee access to quality and affordable health care. This will involve reconfiguring the National Hospital Insurance Fund and reforming the governance of private insurance companies to align them to the universal health care. Mr. Speaker, His Excellency the President has already launched a comprehensive NHIF medical scheme for secondary school students to insure them for all kinds of injuries and diseases. We expect this to ease the financial burden of their parents. Mr. Speaker, working with counties, we shall scale up the provision of specialized medical equipment and increase the number of health facilities at the community level, including mobile health services, in order to increase access to specialized health care. Mr. Speaker, we plan to expand the Linda Mama program to mission hospitals and private hospitals to enlist community health volunteers to help in healthcare service provision at grassroots level. We will also continue to train more doctors while sourcing specialized skill from outside to address existing gaps. Mr. Speaker, in the next 1 year, we will undertake a universal health coverage pilot in 4 counties, namely Kisumu, Nyeri, Isiolo, and Machakos. The lessons learned from the pilot in terms of capacity of NHIF and the requirement on infrastructure, commodities, and personnel will inform the rollout to all the counties in the subsequent years. Mr. Speaker, we acknowledge the limited budgetary space to implement the Big Four plan. As such, we will leverage on the partnership, especially through the PPP framework with the private sector and development partners. Mr. Speaker, Our development partners have supported us in various projects that have uplifted our living standards. We value this support very much. We will be engaging with them in the spirit of true partnership to make the Big Four plan a reality. Already, many of our development partners are funding projects within the Big Four sectors. But in addition to that, and with a view to mobilizing additional resources, they have indicated their willingness to review the rest of their portfolio to align them with the Big Four plan. Mr. Speaker, let me now turn to the fiscal policy and budget framework for 2018-2019 budget and the medium term. Mr. Speaker, in this financial year ending June 2018, we estimate a fiscal deficit of 7.2% of GDP, down from 9.1% of GDP in the previous year. This reduction in the deficit was despite additional expenditure requirement arising from the severe drought, prolonged electioneering period, and the implementation of several collective bargaining agreements combined with shortfall in revenue collection. Mr. Speaker, in order to recoup the revenue shortfalls during the first half of this year, we agreed on a number of revenue enhancement initiatives with the Kenya Revenue Authority in February this year. With the additional funding of 4.3 billion from the National Treasury, KRA committed to collect additional revenue of 74 billion Kenya shillings, by end of June this year. By April 2018, KRA had collected 33 billion, and we expect them to deliver the remaining revenue yield by end June 2018. Mr. Speaker, going forward, now that the challenges we faced in last 2 years are behind us, we plan to bring down the deficit progressively to ensure that our public debt remains sustainable. Mr. Speaker, under this fiscal consolidation plan, we project the fiscal deficit to narrow to 5.7% of GDP in 2018-2019 from the estimated 7.2% of GDP in 2017-2018 financial year, and further to around 3% of GDP by 2021-2022 financial year. As such, this will help stabilize the net present value of debt to GDP ratio at below 50%, which is well below the 74% threshold considered to signal any unsustainable debt position. Mr. Speaker, strengthening revenues through tax policy measures is at the core of achieving the fiscal targets. Our revenue administration measures are also key. I will outline some of these measures shortly. Mr. Speaker, with revenue enhancement measures, we project revenue to rise by 17.5% to 1.9 trillion Kenya shillings, equivalent to 20% of GDP in financial year 2018-2019, from the estimated 1.659 trillion collected in this financial year. Mr. Speaker, we will continue to strengthen expenditure control and improve the efficiency of public spending through public financial management reforms in order to free fiscal space for priority social and economic projects. In particular, Mr. Speaker, we plan to address the challenges we face in project identification, preparation, and execution, which have been responsible for delays, cost overruns, and pending bills. Towards this end, we have established a public investment and management unit at the National Treasury to improve the management and the budgeting of public development projects. This unit will ensure that all the projects in the budget are appraised before they are committed. This will improve efficiency of our public investment, streamline spending, and reduce waste. Mr. Speaker, this year we'll witness the implementation of the second phase of the salary review following the 2017 job evaluation by the Salaries and Remuneration Commission, SRC. We commit to stay on this path so that we can contain the public sector wage bill. Mr. Speaker, given our expenditure containment measures, we project the total expenditure of 2.55 trillion Kenya shillings, equivalent to 26.3% of GDP in 2018-2019. Of this, recurrent expenditure will amount to 1.5 trillion, equivalent to 15.9% of GDP. Development expenditure is projected at 625 billion, equivalent to 6.4% of GDP, and transfers to county governments will amount to 376.4 billion, equivalent to 3.9% of GDP. Mr. Speaker, the deficit of 558.9 billion, equivalent to 5.7% of GDP, will be financed by net external financing amounting to 287 billion Kenya shillings, equivalent to 3% of GDP, while other domestic financing will amount to 271.9 billion Kenya shillings, equivalent to 2.8% of GDP. Mr. Speaker, we will continue to diversify the sources of funding of our development budget over the medium term by maintaining a presence in the international capital market. We will seek to maximize our access to official development assistance on concessional terms while limiting use of non-concessional and commercial external borrowing to development projects with high financial and economic return. Mr. Speaker, as you are aware, this House has reviewed the 2018-2019 budget estimates that I submitted on April 26, 2018. I want to thank the Budget and Appropriation Committee and all departmental committee for interrogating the estimates. Based on the Budget and Appropriation Committee reports adopted by the House, the Committee of Supplies has now approved the estimates, paving the way for finalization of the appropriation bill. Today, I submit the Finance Bill 2018, which contains the taxation and financial proposals, along with other documents for consideration and approval by this august House. Mr. Speaker, let me now turn to the various tax measures that I intend to introduce through the Finance Bill 2018 to realize the objectives set out in the Big Four plan. Mr. Speaker, the tax proposals that I am submitting through the 2018 Finance Bill are designed to generate an additional 27.5 billion Kenya shillings in tax revenue for financial year 2018-2019. In addition, the proposed tax measures are intended to incentivize the achievement of the Big Four plan and offer strategic incentives. Mr. Speaker, allow me to highlight some of the tax proposals in this budget. Mr. Speaker, during the East African Community EAC pre-budget consultation meetings, we agreed on custom duties aimed at promoting industrialization, encouraging local investment, and creating incentives in agricultural and manufacturing sectors. The measures are also intended to make our products more competitive, while at the same time protecting local industries from unfair competition. Mr. Speaker, details of the custom measures will be communicated through the East African Gazette and implementation for implementation from 1st July this year. I will highlight just a few of them. Mr. Speaker, our iron ore and steel industry is facing stiff competition from imported cheap and subsidized iron and steel products. In order to protect the local iron and steel industries, I have increased the rate of import duty from 25% to 35% in a wide range of steel and iron products which are available in the region. Mr. Speaker, Kenya has sufficient capacity to produce some paper and paper products which require protection. To protect manufacturers of these products, I have increased the rate of import duty from 25% to 35% on some paper and paperboard produced in the region. Mr. Speaker, our textile and footwear sector are closing down due to increased unfair competition from cheap imported textile and footwear, as well as second-hand clothing and footwear. In order to encourage local production and create jobs for our youth in the sector, I have introduced a specific rate of import duty of $5 per unit, or 35%, whichever is higher. This should guard against undervaluation.
This is NTV.
Hata nyumbani, we mean business. Fiber Home is now upgraded to 5 times the speed with speeds of up to 1000 Mbps. Fiber Home 10 is now Fiber Home 50 with 50 Mbps for only 10,000 Kenya shillings. Mmenijenga sana, wacha na mimi niwajenge pia.
It's killed an estimated 123,346 mosquitoes in the time it's taken me to say this. We call it Bolt. Mosquitoes call it the Terminator. Bolt kills them fast. The only insecticide made of 100% natural Kenyan pyrethrum. Buy Bolt 600 ml or 400 ml and get 180 ml tropical air freshener free. Save 200 shillings. Buy Bolt 280 ml and get 75 ml Bolt free. Save 105 shillings. From Tropical Brands.
Hata nyumbani, we mean business. Fiber Home is now upgraded to 5 times the speed with speeds of up to 1000 Mbps. Fiber Home 5 is now Fiber Home 30 with 30 Mbps for only 5,000 Kenya shillings. Mmenijenga sana, wacha na mimi niwajenge pia.
To the outer framers, the turtleneckers, the fringe growers, you don't need to hide anymore. Try Dettol Even Tone. It cleans and helps to reduce the appearance of blemishes caused by oil, dirt and germs, giving your skin a healthy feel. Dettol, be 100% sure.
Rap Song of the Week in association with Sprite.
100 liters. Mr. Speaker, the difference in the rates applicable to these two petroleum products has led to adulteration of the fuel products, resulting in loss of excise duty revenue to the exchequer. Mr. Speaker, in order to reduce the incidence of adulteration of fuel, I propose to harmonize the rate of excise duty applicable on illuminating kerosene to 10,305 per 1,000 litre. Mr. Speaker, let me now turn to the income tax. Mr. Speaker, in the recent years, we have implemented tax reforms aimed at modernizing tax legislation and simplification of tax administration. In this pursuit, most of the tax statutes have been reviewed with the exception of the Income Tax Act. We are currently in the process of undertaking a comprehensive review of the Income Tax Act, and we now have a new draft bill that has undergone public participation in accordance with the constitutional requirement. Mr. Speaker, in the Income Tax Bill 2018, I have proposed to introduce I had proposed to introduce a higher tax band of 35% on income above 750 per month, and an increase of the capital gain tax from 5 to 20%. However, during the public consultation on the bill, members of the public raised concern on this proposal and were of the view that the higher rates are not appropriate at this time. We have considered this concern and resolved to revert to the rates contained in the current income tax. Mr. Speaker, we are finalizing the draft bill, then seek approval from the Cabinet before submitting to this House by the end of July 2018. I propose to make limited amendments to the Income Tax Act with a view to address critical issues on revenue gaps and to expand the tax base. Mr. Speaker, the informal sector in our economy is expansive and remains out of the tax net. The Finance Act 2006 introduced taxation of the sector through turnover tax. However, this system of taxation has largely been unsuccessful, and the level of compliance have remained low due to the profile of the sector. I propose to amend the income tax to replace the turnover tax with a presumptive tax based on the business permit or trading license fee at a rate of 15% in order to ensure that the sector contributes towards the economic agenda of the country. Mr. Speaker, in the Tax Laws Amendment Bill 2018, I have proposed to introduce withholding tax on winnings. However, the proposal did not provide how the revenue realized from this measure will be applied. I propose to amend the Income Tax Act to clarify that the revenue realized from the taxes on winnings shall be used for development of sports, arts, cultural activities for the youth, as well as critical socio-economic initiatives, including universal health care. Mr. Speaker, the Port of Mombasa is the gateway to East and Central Africa and is one of the busiest ports along the East African coastline. The port provides direct connectivity to over 80 ports worldwide, attracting various service providers, particularly the shipping lines. Under the current legislative framework, payment for such services, which represent income from Kenya, are not subject to tax. This creates an unfair playing field for residents of Kenya whose income from similar sources are subject to tax. I therefore propose to amend the Income Tax Act to subject payment for demurrage charges made to non-resident persons to withholding tax at a rate of 20%. Mr. Speaker, Kenya represents one of the Africa's most well-developed and best regulated insurance market. General insurance is about twice the life insurance penetration, and the assets have grown over time. Some streams of income from this sector, including payment to non-resident persons and capital gains made by general insurance, are not taxed under the current legal framework. Mr. Speaker, I propose to introduce capital gain tax on transfer of property by general insurance companies. In addition, I propose to amend the Income Tax Act to introduce 5% tax on insurance premium paid to non-residents, excluding insurance premium paid for insurance of aircraft. Mr. Speaker, the government is committed to attract investors into the country. To facilitate investment by targeted investors, the government will provide special fiscal incentives through a special operating framework arrangement that outlines the special conditions and deliverables that are measurable and with specific timelines that must be met. Mr. Speaker, I propose to develop a framework to introduce special incentives in the VAT Act, Excise Duty Act, and Miscellaneous Fee and Levies Act, and provide a preferential tax rate under the Income Tax Act in order to encourage investment. Mr. Speaker, the government is dedicated to support the manufacturing sector as a pillar of the Big Four plan. The manufacturers have raised concern regarding the high cost of electricity. The government is committed to reducing this cost to support the manufacturing sector. Mr. Speaker, in order to mitigate the cost of production, I propose to amend the income tax to provide a deduction of 30% of the total electricity bill by manufacturers from corporate profits, in addition to normal deductions subject to the conditions to be set by the Ministry of Energy. Mr. Speaker, in 2016, the Tax Procedure Act was amended to provide a tax amnesty on income declared on the year 2016 by a person who earned taxable income outside Kenya. In 2017, I extended the period for applying for amnesty from 30th December 2017 to 30th of June 2018 for the year of income 2016. However, despite the extension, the uptake of the amnesty has been low, partly due to the concern that when the monies are returned, questions will be raised regarding the source as required by the Financial Reporting Center. In this regard, Mr. Speaker, and in order to encourage the uptake of the amnesty, I propose to extend the period of the amnesty from 30th June 2018 to 30th June 2019, and the year of income declaration to be 2017. Further, I propose to provide the funds transferred. I propose to provide that funds transferred under the amnesty shall be exempt from the provisions of the Proceeds of Crime and Anti-Money Laundering Act and any other act relates to reporting and investigation of financial transactions to the extent of the source of the funds. Mr. Speaker, these exemptions, however, does not extend to proceeds of terrorism, poaching, and drug trafficking. Mr. Speaker, despite imposing a 1% late payment interest on unpaid taxes, we have noted that a number of taxpayers are filing returns without payment of the taxes due. I am therefore proposing to amend the Tax Procedure Act to increase the rate of late payment interest to 2% and also introduce a 20% late payment penalty. This will promote tax compliance among taxpayers and boost our revenue mobilization efforts to avail the much-needed funds to support the Big Four plan. Mr. Speaker, the government has been working on simplifying and facilitating filing of self-assessment tax returns by taxpayers. In order to enhance the process of submission of tax returns through the iTax system, I propose to amend the Tax Procedure Act to provide for time limit in the application and extension of time to file a return, as well as allow taxpayers to amend the self-assessment return. Mr. Speaker, in the year 2015, I exempted regulatory authorities from payment of corporate tax and provided that these authorities remit 90% of their surpluses to the consolidated fund. However, These regulatory authorities have not been consistent in remitting the surplus to the consolidated fund. In this regard, I propose to amend the Kenya Revenue Act and the Public Financial Management Regulations to allow Kenya Revenue Authority to collect surpluses from the regulatory authorities and remit them to the consolidated fund promptly. Mr. Speaker, currently there is no penalty on interest on payment of taxes in betting, lotteries, and gaming sector, which has led to non-compliance. In order to ensure compliance and prompt payment of taxes, I propose to introduce a 20% penalty and 2% interest on late payment of tax in betting, lotteries, and gaming act. This will enhance the collection of these taxes that are meant to support sports, arts, culture, and social development activities in our country. Mr. Speaker, one of the pillars under the Big Four plan is to promote manufacturing activities. To achieve this, it is important to support value addition through measures to retain raw materials like scrap metals in order to protect local manufacturers and stem the tide against vandalism of public infrastructure. In this regard, I propose to introduce an export levy of 20% on copper waste and scrap metals. Mr. Speaker, allow me now to turn to how government will spend the resources in this budget. As stated earlier, total spending will increase from 2.3 billion to 2.3 trillion in financial year 2017-2018 to 2.5 trillion in 2018-2019. In relation to GDP, this represents a reduction from 26.8% of GDP to 26.3%, consistent with our fiscal consolidation plan. Mr. Speaker, despite the planned fiscal consolidation, resource allocation criteria was aimed at ensuring that funding to the Big Four plan was prioritized. In total, I have allocated 460 billion to Big Four sector drivers and enablers. We have also sustained prioritization of resources to other pro-poor programs such as social protection, education, access to electricity, and drought mitigation measures. Mr. Speaker, the specific incentives under the Special Economic Zone Act and other special incentives, together with the PPP arrangement, will draw in investors into the manufacturing sectors. To catalyze this, the government will provide the enabling infrastructure, including building industrial sheds. To this end, I have allocated 400 million for the leather industrial park development and 400 million for textile development. Mr. Speaker, to modernize facilities in Rivertex and the new KCC, we have allocated 1.4 billion and 200 million respectively. Mr. Speaker, to enhance food and nutrition security and modernize agriculture, I have allocated 1.4 billion for strategic food reserves, 1.9 billion for Kenya Cereal Enhancement Program, and 0.5 billion for mechanization of agriculture, and 900 million for crop diversification. Mr. Speaker, the severe drought that we experienced last year underscores the importance of reducing our reliance on rain-fed agriculture. Mr. Speaker, in order to reduce our vulnerability to drought and bring additional land under crop production, I have allocated a total of 8.5 billion for ongoing irrigation projects in Bur and Mwea, national expanded irrigation programs, and smallholder irrigation programs Galana, Kulalu, Turkana, and micro irrigation in schools. Mr. Speaker, we will continue to improve accessibility of fertilizer and crop insurance. To this end, I have set aside 4.3 billion for subsidized fertilizer, 300 million to support crop insurance schemes in order to cushion farmers against climate-related risk, and 300 million for fall armyworm mitigation. On subsidized fertilizer, I expect the Ministry of Agriculture to reform the supply chain systems and ensure better service to farmers with the ongoing registration of farmers. Mr. Speaker, To further expand access to affordable healthcare, I have allocated 2 billion to free primary healthcare, 800 million for health insurance subsidy program, and 2.5 billion for rollout of universal health coverage to 4 counties on a pilot basis. Mr. Speaker, to continue with the initiative of His Excellency the President on universal health care, we have provided a total of 13.7 billion to further support the free maternal health care program and leasing of medical equipment. Mr. Speaker, in view of the increasing cases of cancer-related deaths, early screening and management is imperative. We have allocated 7 billion for leasing of computed tomography scanners equipment, which will help diagnose the disease at an early stage and cap cancer deaths. I have also allocated 400 million for the establishment of the Cancer Institute. Mr. Speaker, other allocations to improve health service delivery include 2.9 billion for doctors, clinical officers, nurses internship program, 11.7 billion for Kenyatta National Hospital, 7.7 billion for Moi Teaching and Referral Hospital, and 2.2 billion for Kenya Medical Research Institute, and 4.7 billion for Kenya Medical Training Center. Mr. Speaker, on affordable housing program, the initiative we plan to implement will draw private sector involvement to develop housing units that a majority of Kenyans can afford. Mr. Speaker, to roll out the housing program, we have provided 3 billion Kenya shillings for construction of affordable social housing units by the government, and 1.5 billion for construction of housing units for police and Kenya prisons. We have also provided 1.5 billion for the Civil Servants Housing Scheme Fund to support the offtake of the housing units. Mr. Speaker, we plan to provide infrastructure and utilities to urban land owned by national and county governments, and invite the private sector to develop affordable housing units. To this end, we will restructure the Kenya Urban Support Program, Kisumu Urban Projects, and Nairobi Metropolitan Services Improvement Project to provide 18.4 billion to support the servicing of land in various towns in the country to bring in private developers into the affordable housing program. Mr. Speaker, as I stated earlier, the government has successfully implemented the economic transformation agenda during the last 5 years. This has created a strong and solid foundation for economic transformation and industrialization as envisaged in the Kenya Vision 2030. Building on this progress made thus far, Mr. Speaker, the strategy going forward will involve implementing the programs and policies that support achievements of the Big Four plan so as to boost structure supporting our security forces and guaranteeing Kenyans safety. We shall build on the ongoing security reforms by scaling up investment in security infrastructure. Mr. Speaker, to support this initiative, I have set aside 8.9 billion for enhanced security operations, 29.8 billion for police and military modernization, 3 billion for securing our borders, and 9.2 billion for leasing of police vehicles. Mr. Speaker, to improve the welfare of our police officers, I have allocated 6.5 billion for police and prisons officers medical insurance scheme and group life insurance for police. Mr. Speaker, with regard to infrastructure as an enabler to further enhance movement of Kenyans and reduce the cost of transportation of goods, I have allocated 115.9 billion for ongoing roads and construction projects, and 74.7 billion for the construction of phase 2 of the SGR. I have also allocated 2.7 billion for the Mombasa Port Development Projects and 1.4 billion for the expansion of Malindi, Isiolo, Lokichogyo airports, and Kapunde, Kakamega, Kitale, and Migori airstrips. In addition, I have set aside funds for emergency repair of roads damaged by the recent floods across the country. I'll also be engaging our development partners towards mobilizing additional resources for the same purpose. Mr. Speaker, to support generation of adequate and affordable energy, I have allocated 12.7 billion to support the exploration of geothermal, wind, and solar resources, and 4.8 billion for the exploration and distribution of oil and gas. Mr. Speaker, to connect more Kenyans to affordable electricity, I have set aside 5.9 billion for rural electrification and connection of public facilities, 6.7 billion for last mile connectivity, 1 billion for the National Street Lighting Program, 5.5 billion Kenya shillings for Eastern Electricity Highway Project, Ethiopia-Kenya Interconnector, 1 billion for substation installation, 1 billion for installation of transformers in constituencies, 1 billion for connectivity subsidy, and 12.6 billion for Loyangalani-Suswa transmission line, land compensation, and counterpart funding, and 3.1 billion for Nairobi 220 kV ring road. Mr. Speaker, the provision of quality and relevant education and training is critical in equipping Kenyans with skills necessary for industrialization. For this reason, the government will focus on improving and expanding technical and vocational education and training institute in order to equip the youth with the relevant skills necessary for industrialization. For this reason, we have allocated 16 billion for technical institutions for recruitment of additional 2,000 technical training instructors, capitation grants, 15 new technical training institutes, curriculum development assessment, and certification centers and technical vocational training authority. We also allocated 91.1 billion to support university education and 9.6 billion for higher education loans board. Mr. Speaker, to further expand access to quality basic education, we implemented a 100% transition policy in January this year. To sustain this, I have allocated 59.4 billion for free day secondary education. In addition, I have allocated 13.4 billion for free primary education program and 4 billion for examination free waiver for all class 8 and form 4 candidates, and 2 billion for school feeding program. Further, to increase the teacher to student ratio, I have set aside 5 billion for the recruitment of additional teachers. Mr. Speaker, we need to further develop our capabilities in the area of science, technology, and innovation. Leading this drive, the government has spearheaded major ICT investments, including the expansion of fiber optic backbone infrastructure across the counties, which has facilitated reliable high-speed network and supported e-government services and innovation among businesses. In this budget, Mr. Speaker, we have further enhanced allocation to support the ICT sector and improve government service delivery. We have allocated 11.9 billion for the digital literacy program, 8.3 billion to support the ongoing construction of Konza Complex, 100 million for presidential digital talent program, 310 million for digital migration KBC. Mr. Speaker, to support service delivery by government agencies, we have set aside 300 million for single window support projects and 700 million for continued rollout of IFMIS to counties. We have also consolidated all ICT equipments and licensing expenditure under the Ministry of ICT in order to facilitate better coordination of government ICT strategy and eliminate duplication. Mr. Speaker, we have taken decisive steps to care for and share with the community by enhancing support for disadvantaged. Mr. Speaker, under the National Safety Safety Net Inua Jamii program. We have extended cash transfers to vulnerable groups, including older persons, OVCs, and persons with disability. Mr. Speaker, to further relieve the blight of less disadvantaged in the society, combat poverty, and promote equity, the national safety net has been enhanced as follows: 7.9 billion for orphans and vulnerable children, 17.3 billion for cash transfers to the elderly persons, and 1.2 billion for cash transfers to the persons with severe disabilities. Mr. Speaker, to further support the less fortunate families, we have set aside 1.2 billion for Children Welfare Society, 400 million for Presidential Secondary School Bursary Scheme, 4.5 billion for Kenya Anga Safety Net, and 8.5 billion for the Equalization Fund. Further, Mr. Speaker, I have set aside 35.7 billion for the National Government Constituency Development Fund and 2.3 billion for Affirmative Action Fund to promote equity for social development. Mr. Speaker, our resolve to empower youth, women, persons with disability, and other vulnerable groups through various initiatives, including provision of affirmative funds and reservation of public procurement opportunities, remains steadfast. Already, Mr. Speaker, we have set registrations and advisory services for these groups in 52 Huduma centers spread all over the country. The National Treasury is closely monitoring the implementation of the programs to ensure full compliance by all public entities. Mr. Speaker, we will continue to create a conducive environment for micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises to thrive, as they are the pillar to create jobs for our youth. Work is being done to provide funding in an efficient manner. Mr. Speaker, to support sports, culture, and arts, I have allocated 200 million for construction of Sports Academy, 300 million for the construction of ultra-modern National Library. Funding for sports, culture, and arts will be enhanced significantly with the creation of the new fund that will receive money from the taxation of betting and gaming. Mr. Speaker, since the commencement of the devolution 5 years ago, it is evident that the resources are now closer to the people. Decisions are made at the grassroots level, and public participation is a requirement at every level of government, at every level of engagement. The over 1.3 trillion that has gone to the county governments in the last 5 years has ensured uninterrupted service delivery by all the 47 counties. Mr. Speaker, in 2018-2019, we are providing to counties a further 376.4 billion, comprising a shareable revenue of 314 billion and conditional allocation amounting to 62.4 billion. The allocations in the 2018-2019 translate to 40% of most recent audit revenue, well in excess of the constitutional threshold of 15%. This will be in addition to the funds provided under CDF, the National Government Affirmative Actions Fund, which as you all know, goes to the grassroots level, in addition to the funds appropriated from the Equalization Fund. Mr. Speaker, we will be coming back to Parliament with specific projects to be funded from the Equalization Fund as soon as the Commission on Revenue Allocation develop the second policy on marginalized areas. The previous policy expired this financial year, and there was no basis to prepare appropriation for the Equalization Fund. Mr. Speaker, I wish to highlight three key challenges facing county governments. First, the shrinking county on-source revenue collection. Second, escalation of expenditure arrears, which deny local businesses the necessary capital to support growth. And third, weaknesses in public financial management, exposing county public finances to leakages and wasteful spending. Mr. Speaker, to support county government to improve revenue collection, we have finalized a policy to support the enhancement of county-owned sources of revenue. We have also prepared the county government revenue raising regulation process bill 2018, which provides for regulations of the process of introducing new taxes, fees, and charges by county government. This is intended to address the concerns of double taxation by goods and services moving from one county to the next, and is consistent with Article 209 of the Constitution, which prohibits revenue-raising measures which impede the movement of goods and services within Kenya. I will shortly be submitting these two documents to Parliament for consideration and approval upon Cabinet approval. Mr. Speaker, to stop the growth of expenditure arrears in counties, we have agreed with the county government that all pending bills shall be subjected to verification. Once authenticated, the arrear shall be included in the budget as a first charge on the respective county revenue funds as required under the Public Financial Management County Government Regulations 2015. I urge county assemblies and Parliament to assist us by enforcing this agreement. Mr. Speaker, to strengthen the capacity of county government to manage public finances, human resources, as well as to monitor and evaluate county plans and conduct civil education and engage with the public, I have allocated 800 million under the World Bank sponsored Kenya Devolution Support Program, KDSP, and I intend to scale up this allocation to 6.3 billion in the course of the year. In addition, in order to enhance public financial management skills of the county government officials, the National Treasury will intensify its training at the Kenya School of Government, including on public procurement. Mr. Speaker, we will continue to cooperate with the county governments to ensure quality, effective, and efficient service delivery to our citizens. In this context, Mr. Speaker, the government has partnered with the African Development Bank to implement a program that seeks to improve access and quality water supply and sanitation services in urban areas in Kenya in a sustainable manner. In addition, Mr. Speaker, the national government is also collaborating with the Nairobi City County in the implementation of the Nairobi Regeneration Program. Some of the activities to be undertaken under this program are first, cleaning the Nairobi River; second, issuing over 50,000 land titles to the landowners in Eastlands of Nairobi City County; third, decongesting Nairobi City by creating a mass rapid transit system and deploying high-capacity buses; fourth, decongesting Kenyatta National Hospital by providing capacity facilities under the Nairobi City County government, such as Mama Lucy, Mutuini, and Pumwani Hospital. Mr. Speaker, to support regeneration of Nairobi River in collaboration between the national government and the Nairobi City County government, I have allocated 800 million in the budget for financial year 2018-2019. Mr. Speaker, with the discovery of new minerals, we are determined to work with mining companies and communities to grow the sector, attract new investment, create jobs, and set the industry on a new path of transformation and sustainability. Mr. Speaker, to further support mining activities and geophysical mapping, I have set aside 509 million and a further 500 million respectively. Mr. Speaker, to further support development of a blue economy, I have allocated 575 million to aquaculture technology development and innovation transfers. Mr. Speaker, our strategies to revive tourism have borne fruits. Mr. Speaker, to further support tourism activities, I have allocated 1 billion to scale up to promotion of tourism, 340 million for sustaining new markets and siting booths, 380 million for capital lending to hoteliers, and 325 million for restoration of Fort Jesus. Mr. Speaker, the early oil pilot scheme has now taken off, setting Kenya on stage to join the League of Oil Exporting Countries. Like our neighbors, Kenya has the potential of harnessing many other natural resources, and this will further diversify our economy and provide the much needed foreign exchange and job creation. It is critically important, Mr. Speaker, that we design a framework for managing this new resources in order to avoid the so-called Dutch disease. In this context, we have already completed the Sovereign Wealth Fund legislation, which will help us deal with the potential windfall of resources from the extractive sector and will also help us manage the resources responsibly for the current and future generation. We will soon be submitting this legislation to this August House after cabinet approval. Concurrently, Mr. Speaker, we are working with our private sector partners to develop the necessary infrastructure to evacuate and achieve early monetization of our crude oil resources. In this regard, work is ongoing for, one, development of the upstream facilities, which include drilling of 200 production wells and installation of the necessary oil drilling facilities to allow the flow of 60,000 to 80,000 barrels of oil per day. Second, the development of the proposed 821 kilometers crude oil pipeline from Lokichar oil field to Lamu, and 3 export facilities at Lamu. As this is commercially viable project, we plan to deliver it on a project finance basis without recourse to public debt. The government will, however, invest as a shareholder in the integrated project and will provide public sector facilitation as necessary. Mr. Speaker, the recent drought and floods that have afflicted most parts of the country and has caused the need to preserve our forests and environment. Therefore, to enhance and sustain environmental protection, flood control and water harvesting intervention, I have allocated 7.2 billion for water resource management, 33.7 billion for water and sewerage infrastructure development, 2.9 billion for environmental management and protection, 10.9 billion for forest and water towers conservation, 8.3 billion for integrated rural development, and 2.2 billion for meteorological services. Mr. Speaker, to further enhance our capacity to handle the effect of floods and other disasters in the future, the Cabinet has approved the Disaster Risk Management Policy and Disaster Financing Strategy, as well as the Disaster Risk Management Fund. In addition, the Cabinet has also approved the National Drought Emergency Fund for timely mobilization of resources to fund intervention, mitigation, and recovery. Mr. Speaker, a key enabler for achieving the Big Four is eradication of corruption. Without vigorously addressing corruption, we will not achieve our aspiration of becoming a middle-income country with a high quality of life. It is critical, therefore, that each arm of government, the legislature, judiciary, and the executive play its role firmly and without fear or favor. Mr. Speaker, the new constitution provides for independent institutions, commissions, and institutions dealing with governance. We have strengthened the multi-agency team, enabling them to investigate, prosecute, and recover corruptly acquired assets. Additionally, we have enhanced the oversight and the legislative role of Parliament and access to justice by allocating 36.8 billion to Parliament and 15.2 billion to the judiciary. Mr. Speaker, we have undertaken reforms to improve the public procurement and disposable system in order to effectively and efficiently manage our resources as provided for in the Constitution. These have simplified the procurement process. To enhance this further, we intend to revamp the procurement process. Firstly, we will shortly be submitting to Parliament the public procurement and asset disposal regulations. Allow me, Mr. Speaker, to share some of the major highlights of the public procurement and asset disposal regulations, which provides for, one, establishment of a common user agency that will facilitate and manage the procurement of standard goods and items. This is aimed at reaping economies of scale while minimizing expenditure and having standard pricing on such items. Two, enhancement of the e-procurement platform to improve efficiency and effectiveness, accountability and transparency in the procurement process. Three, provisions to facilitate prompt payment for for performed contracts within 60 days upon proper certification of the same. 4, provision to to farms that supply manufactured articles, materials, or supplies only produced or mined in Kenya to enjoy various margins of preference in procurement evaluation. Fifth, margins of preference shall also be extended to local contractors and suppliers, where Kenyans are shareholders and offering goods manufactured, assembled, mined, extracted, or grown in Kenya. To this end, all accounting officers of procuring entities are required to procure items manufactured in Kenya to embrace the Buy Kenya, Build Kenya initiative. Where an accounting officer is unable to procure items wholly or partially manufactured in Kenya, he or she shall cause a report detailing evidence of inability to procure such items. Mr. Speaker, we intend to make procurement as transparent as possible, in line with yesterday's presidential directive on procurement processes and consistent with the provision of Public Procurement and Asset Disposal Act 2015. All accounting officers of ministries, departments, and agencies and parastatals are required to publish and publicize all procurement contracts on their website, the state portal, and tender notice boards with effect from 1st July 2018. The publication, Mr. Speaker, shall contain the following information. 1, names and designations of the Tender Evaluation Committee members. 2, the names of the contractor, supplier awarded the contract. 3, the names of directors of the awarded firms. 4, the contract price and tender sum. And finally, the contract period, including commencement and the completion period. Accordingly, Mr. Speaker, all the accounting officers will be expected to share the reports on contract award to the National Treasury and the Public Procurement Regulatory Authority for publication on its website notices. This directive will enhance transparency and accountability in the public procurement and asset disposal proceedings. In addition, Mr. Speaker, we are working very closely with the key investigative agents of government, including the EACC, the National Intelligence, and the Director of Criminal Investigation, to identify and seal any loopholes that corrupt individuals may be using within the IFMIS system. Mr. Speaker, to strengthen various institutions that are mandated to fight corruption in the country, I have allocated 2.9 billion to the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission, 2.9 billion to the Department of Public Prosecution, 161 million to the Asset Recovery Agency, 587 million to the Financial Reporting Center, and 6.4 billion to the Criminal Investigation Services, and 5.1 billion to the Office of the Attorney General. Mr. Speaker, Kenya has made significant steps towards improving its anti-money laundering measures and abiding by global standards on anti-money laundering and financing of terrorism. To further tighten these measures, I propose to amend the Proceeds of Crime and Anti-Money Laundering Act to address money laundering and terrorism financing risks associated with non-face-to-face businesses and transactions. In addition, Mr. Speaker, I propose to include the SACCO Society's regulatory authorities as one of the supervisory bodies under Proceeds of Crime and Anti-Money Laundering Act to give the authority a legal platform to monitor compliance of deposit-taking SACCOs in respect to prevention of money laundering and combating financing of terrorism. Mr. Speaker, currently there are limited criteria for assessment of applicants to acquire casino operations license. It is important that before issuance of a casino license, individuals and companies be vetted in order to adhere to the global standards on anti-money laundering measures. In this regard, I propose to introduce a legal framework that will enable the Betting Control and Licensing Board to take into account a wider criterion while undertaking fit and proper test. Mr. Speaker, the strategic role of the state corporation in the creation of a conducive business environment and the implementation of delivery of key development priorities cannot be gainsaid. To ensure that this corporations continue to play a critical role in the delivery of our economic and social agenda, we will undertake key reforms aimed at addressing systemic weaknesses in the parastatal subsector, as well as address specific challenges facing the individual institution. Mr. Speaker, to address these challenges and align the mandate of specific corporations to the Big Four plan, we will implement specific restructuring measures, including reforming the Agricultural Finance Corporation, FC, to help deliver on the food and nutrition security. 2, merging of the Industrial and Commercial Development Corporation, ICDC, with the Industrial Development Bank and the Tourism Finance Corporation, TFC, to create the Kenya Development Bank with enhanced capacity to meet the financing requirement of key sectors. And 3, implementing initiatives to address the challenges of government investments in the banking sector. Mr. Speaker, we will also be reviewing the privatization program with a view to identifying, unlocking, and prioritizing transactions with high impact potential in the implementation of the National Development Agenda. In this regard, we seek the cooperation of key political actors, without whose support the program will not succeed. Mr. Speaker, Kenya's aviation sector has faced a steady decline over the last decade, characterized most notably by the turbulent performance of the national carrier and the loss of business by Jomo Kenyatta International Airport to other competing regional hubs. Mr. Speaker, if Kenya has to achieve its objective of being a premier aviation hub in the region, it has to begin to look at its aviation assets more strategically as key contributors to GDP. And this starts with having a world-class national airline and a world-class airport, starting with JKIA as the main gateway to the country. We will therefore be restructuring our aviation sector to enhance the competitiveness of our airline and key airports, particularly JKIA, as we position Kenya as an international, commercial, and financial hub. Mr. Speaker, we are presently in the process of establishing the National Toll Fund as a special fund to support the development of world-class national trunk roads. Key among them are the Mombasa to Malaba and Busia, as well as Lamu to Interland destination. Mr. Speaker, under the PPP program, 2 roads annuity projects have reached financial close, namely the Ngong, Kiserian, Isinya, and Kajiado, Imaroro roads. These roads will shortly progress to construction. We have also signed contracts for 6 other projects, namely the 1,050 megawatts Lamu coal plant, 3 PPP projects to deliver 105 megawatts of geothermal power at Menengai, 3 Wajir, Samatar, and Ramu Mandera Road annuity project, and 4 Kenyatta University Students Hostel project. We have also launched tenders for the Nairobi, Nakuru, Mau Summit PPP toll roads. 2, we have also launched tenders for the 2nd Nyali Bridge toll projects, and 3rd Moi University Student Hostel projects. We have also launched tenders for Southeastern Kenyatta University Student Hostels, Embu University Students Hostel, and Embu University Students Hostel. In addition, we have completed contract negotiations on the Likoni cable car project at Mombasa, and we have 4 other PPP projects currently under contract negotiations under the road annuity program. Further, a pipeline of more PPP projects is under preparation. Tourism, water, solid waste, energy, ports, education, agriculture, housing, and manufacturing sector. Mr. Speaker, allow me at this stage to invite Kenya pension funds and other local institutional investors to consider PPP as a distinct assets class and to partner with the government in enhancing our country's capacity for public-private partnerships. We note that these funds have the potential to play a critical role, particularly in providing local currency financing for PPP projects, thereby significantly de-risking projects from foreign currency funded exposure. Mr. Speaker, to create a more robust framework for implementation of PPP projects, the government intends to revamp the PPP unit with the aim of speeding up the pace of project preparatory activities while being mindful of the need to ensure projects are well prepared and all considerations required by law are taken into account. In this regard, we have completed a review of the PPP ecosystem and have taken a legal audit of the PPP Act 2013. This work informed the need for the amendments to the various statutes which are before this August House. The proposed amendment focuses on project land acquisition and reduction of the bureaucracy associated with the PPP project development. We shall also be undertaking administrative actions aimed at speeding up project turnaround. These include establishing shortlists of advisory services providers, standardizing project documents, and resourcing the capacity of PPP to deliver its mandate. Mr. Speaker, next week I shall be launching the PPP Disclosure Portal, which is an online platform through which all stakeholders can access all Kenya PPP data. This is our commitment under the Access to Information Act 2016 and a demonstration of our willingness to remain accountable to the people of Kenya for the efficient utilization of their resources for their benefit. Mr. Speaker, let me now turn to the financial sector. Mr. Speaker, the government continues to implement measures and reforms aimed at further deepening and strengthening the financial sector. As a result, the Kenya financial sector has witnessed an upward growth trajectory over the last 7 years, with the proportion of the adult population having access to formal financial services increasing from 66.9% in 2013 to 75.3% in 2016. The efficiency of the financial sector has also generally been on an upward trend over the last 10 years, mainly driven by innovative financial service delivery channels introduced by the players. Similarly, financial stability has been boosted by enhanced credit risk management system as well as improved economic conditions. However, lending to the private sector and enterprises in Kenya has had a mixed results over the next 2 years. Mr. Speaker, you recall that in August 2016, the National Assembly sought to address the public concern about the high cost of credit through the Banking Amendment Act 2016, which imposed a maximum rate of interest for all types of credit offered by banks, as well as the minimum rate of interest on interest-earning deposit account. Mr. Speaker, the interest rate ceiling has contributed to the slow growth in credit to the private sector, and especially to the micro, small, and medium enterprise in the agricultural and trade sectors. Moreover, the aim of the amendments, which was to expand access to financial services and increase return on savings, has not been achieved since banks have shied away from borrowers they consider riskier and have priced above the maximum lending rate. At the same time, there have been concentration on either building non-interest earning deposit accounts or reclassifying interest earning deposit accounts to transaction accounts which do not earn interest. As a result, financial access and economic growth has been adversely impacted. In this regard, the government is putting in place a package of reforms aimed at optimizing lending to the private sector while at the same time encouraging innovation in the financial sector in Kenya. Mr. Speaker, let me detail some of the initiatives that we are undertaking to address the above challenge in our efforts to have a fair, transparent, competitive, efficient, and accessible credit market to serve the needs of our wananchi. Mr. Speaker, in order to enhance access to affordable credit to micro, small, and medium enterprises, which are regarded as high-risk borrowers, the government is working jointly with the private sector and development partners to introduce the National Credit Guarantee Scheme as a policy tool to direct credit to MSME enterprises. The credit guarantee schemes will work through easing the financial constraints of medium and small enterprises and startups by enabling them to access capital. Mr. Speaker, as earlier alluded to the establishment of the Kenya Development Bank, the proposed bank is expected to play a greater role in providing long-term credit to the medium and small enterprises, and especially to support the Big Four plan. Further, Mr. Speaker, in order to increase efficiency and resolve overlap and make better use of resources to achieve economies of scale, the Cabinet has approved Biashara Kenya Fund by merging Uwezo Fund, Youth Enterprise Fund, and Women Enterprise Development Fund. The consolidation of the funds will result in a stronger institution with larger balance sheet that is better able to make the investments in technology needed in a modern financial sector and support the provision of long-term finance that the micro and medium enterprises require. Mr. Speaker, in order to enhance access to credit and minimize the adverse impact of the interest capping on credit while strengthening financial access and monetary policy effectiveness, I propose to amend the Banking Amendment Act 2016 by repealing Section 33B of the said Act. This is to enable banks and other lenders to provide more credit, especially to the borrowers they consider riskier. Mr. Speaker, in order to sustainably deal with the inadequacies in the consumer protection and unregulated lending in the financial sector, we have developed a Financial Market Conduct Bill 2018 that comprehensively addresses these issues and does away with piecemeal and fragmented legislation on consumer credit. The bill also addresses the problem of predatory lending and reckless behavior by credit providers, exploitation of consumers by debt collectors, lending without regard to the borrower's ability to repay, leading to high levels of indebtedness, deceptive pricing, and abusive collective techniques. Mr. Speaker, the draft Financial Market Conduct Bill 28 is currently undergoing stakeholder consultation before Cabinet considers it in due course. Mr. Speaker, other ongoing initiatives include digitalization of land titling processes, development of the functional collateral registry to support provision of affordable credit to Kenya businesses and individuals, and implementation of the Treasury Mobile Direct and Emakiba to offer retail individuals alternative savings mechanism, thus indirectly compelling formal financial services providers to offer competitive savings rate. Mr. Speaker, the aforementioned reforms will not only address shortcomings in the credit market, but it will also catalyze provision of credit to support the government Big Four plan. Mr. Speaker, the next part of my statement focuses on proposed amendment to various acts which mainly targets the financial sector. On the capital markets, Mr. Speaker, the capital markets plays a critical role in our economy and facilitate investment growth in the country. In this context, our capital markets require progressive regulatory framework to enhance investor confidence as well as regulate players in the financial sector. Therefore, I propose to amend the Capital Markets Act to introduce enhanced financial controls and provide for investor protection in the sector. In the Retirement Benefits Act, we have cases of some employers who have failed to remit pension contribution to their respective retirement benefit scheme. In order to compel employers to remit the pension contribution, I propose to amend the Retirement Benefit Act to enable the authority intervene against any employer who fails to remit such contribution to the scheme. Mr. Speaker, as you recall, in 2016, I introduced amendments to the Retirement Benefit Individual Retirement Benefit Scheme regulations and the Retirement Benefit Occupational Retirement Benefit Scheme regulations in order to provide for establishment of a medical fund into which members can contribute during their working life and the same be used to purchase medical cover upon retirement. To further promote this policy and support universal health care and the Big Four, I propose to introduce amendment to the same regulations to allow members who are unable to build medical funds during employment to utilize a portion of their retirement benefits for post-retirement medical cover. I further exempt the fund from the retirement benefit levy in order to boost the members' contribution. Mr. Speaker, the Kenya insurance sector has heavily relied on traditional indemnity-based insurance, which has had challenges due to the requirement for assessment of losses to be conducted before any payment is made. This has led to low uptake of agricultural insurance. In order to provide an alternative to the indemnity-based insurance, I propose to amend the Insurance Act to introduce index-based insurance, which will lead to higher uptake of insurance by our farmers. Further, Mr. Speaker, we have witnessed increased instances of insurance fraud in the insurance sector, mainly due to lack of adequate provisions to govern the sector. In this regard, I propose to amend the Insurance Act to introduce provisions to criminalize insurance fraud and protect the consumers. Mr. Speaker, the current provisions of the Insurance Act allows the insured to pay for premium insurance through an intermediary. The intermediaries delay the payment for the premium, thereby putting the insurance at risk. In order to ensure prompt payment of premium to the insurers and take into account the expanded mode of payment of premium through digital platform, I propose to amend the Insurance Act to require the insured to make payments in respect of premium direct to the insurer. This will enhance prompt coverage of the insured. Mr. Speaker, SACCO Societies Act and regulations require SACCO societies to submit periodic statutory reports and other information to the SACCO society regulatory authorities, mainly on monthly and quarterly basis. These statutory reports are critical components and tools for daily monitoring and evaluation of the financial performance of SACCO societies, such as their liquidity status, capital adequacy, and asset quality, among others. Mr. Speaker, the authority has been progressively adopting risk-based supervision model of supervision, which is the internationally accepted supervision model for financial institutions. The risk-based supervision is heavily dependent on the real-time and accurate data and other statistical information for the SACCO. I therefore propose to amend the SASRA Act to allow the usage of ICT in submission of the statutory reports. In conclusion, Mr. Speaker and fellow Kenyans, the last 2 years were difficult for our nation, but we remained resilient and emerged stronger as a democratic society. Our people have shown incredible patience and optimism. Our president has led the way to find common grounds and heal the wounds arising from divisive politics. Mr. Speaker, the budget I have presented to you has been carefully prepared to balance the difficult choices we had to make in order to move this country forward, implement our president's legacy agenda of radically transforming this country through the Big Four initiative and sustain our public finances. I believe we have made the right decision that will propel this country to prosperity and make us great. Mr. Speaker, despite our limited resources and the need to reduce the fiscal deficit, we have in addition to fund Big Four agenda, sustain the prioritization of resources to poor programs, especially in the areas of social protection, cash transfers, education, health, food security, access to electricity, and drought and disaster risk mitigation measures. The budget is also inclusive and promotes shared prosperity in light of resources allocated to ASAL areas and transfers to counties, National Constituency Development Fund, the National Government Affirmative Action Fund, and the Equalization Fund. Mr. Speaker, let this budget and the subsequent ones be the beginning of revitalization and finding common ground in the way we do things so that we can ensure inclusivity and together tackle the triple challenge of unemployment, poverty, and inequality. Let us seize the present opportunity and support the President's vision for the country and his resolve to weed out corruption and achieve high standards of governance. At this point, Mr. Speaker, I wish to thank His Excellency the President for the wise counsel and the commitment to removing any blockages for the country to achieve its potential. I wish also to thank His Excellency, the Deputy President, my cabinet colleagues and principal secretaries for the support and cooperation throughout the preparation of this budget. I share with my colleagues the collective responsibility of implementing this budget. Mr. Speaker, our sincere thanks also goes to the following. You, Mr. Speaker of the National Assembly and the Speaker of Senate, together with your respective clerks, for facilitating approval process of the budget estimates of 2018-2019 and other budget documents in Parliament. Members of the Budget and Appropriation Committee, led by Chairman Honorable Kimani Ichung'wah, and other departmental committees of the National Assembly, for the time and dedication in sifting through the estimates and constructive debates that help refine the budget. Majority leaders of the both houses, Adan Duale and Kipchumba Murkomen, for the robust support of government economic agenda during the legislative debates. Members of the Finance and National Planning Committee, led by the Chairman, Honorable Joseph Limo, and other departmental committee of Senate, for the constructive engagement on the budget and financial matters. All members of National Assembly and Senate for their cooperation in facilitating legislative proposals in support of budget preparation and implementation. Members of the Intergovernmental Budget and Economic Council, IBEC, for the support and cooperation in intergovernmental and financial matters. Management and staff of the National Treasury and Planning, and including under the able leadership of Honorable Nelson Gashuye, the Chief Administrative Secretary, Dr. Kamau Thuge, the Principal Secretary of National Treasury, and the PS Planning, Dr. Julius Muya, who have tirelessly worked long hours, including most weekends, to ensure that this budget and supporting documents meet the legal deadline. We appreciate your deep commitment to public service. Management and staff of the Central Bank of Kenya and the Kenya Revenue Authority for their contribution, the staff for Attorney General for the legal drafting, the staff of the Parliamentary Budget Office for providing the support and insightful comments throughout the budget process, and our bilateral and multilateral development partners, as well as our private sector for their contribution to our development agenda through their technical and financial support. I must also thank my family and their support, my family for their support and inspiration. Finally, Mr. Speaker, my utmost gratitude goes to the Kenyans from all walks of life for their contribution, proposals, and suggestions received during the finalization of the budget. I wish all Kenyans and the persons who profess the Islamic faith an happy Eidul Fitr. Asanteni sana. God bless you. God bless Kenya. Mr. Speaker, in April 2018, I submitted the budget documents together with the accompanying documents. As I conclude, I further submit the following documents to this August House: the budget statement, which I've just read, the Finance Bill 2018, the Circle Societies Amendment Bill 2018, the Capital Markets Amendment Bill 2018, the Insurance Amendment Bill 2018, the Financial Statement for financial year 2018-2019, the estimates of revenue and loans for financial year 2018 and 2019, and finally, the statistical annex to the budget statement for the financial 2018-2019. Thank you very much.
Honourable members, I wish to thank the Cabinet Secretary for National Treasury for having ably made a public pronouncement of the budget highlights and the various revenue-raising measures for the national government for the financial year 2018-2019 and the medium term. I also wish to confirm that in conformity with the provisions of Standing Order number 244, paragraph C, the Cabinet Secretary as you noticed, with departure from the past, has submitted here in the plenary the various documents, among them the proposed Finance Bill 2018 and other legislative proposals necessary to actualize the revenue-raising measures for the national government for the said period. Honourable members, it is now my pleasure to invite all honourable members, the Cabinet Secretary for the National Treasury, other Cabinet Secretaries and all other invited guests to a reception at the Parliament yard hereafter. Since tomorrow is a public holiday to mark Eid al-Fitr, I must also, in keeping with my tradition, wish all our Muslim brothers and sisters a happy Eid Mubarak. Honourable members, the time being 20 minutes past 5. The House stands adjourned till Tuesday, the 19th of June 2018 at 2:30 p.m.